Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Talk on Things and Stuff. Today is going to be our next segment in a discussion of religion as an evolutionary living faith. And remember, faith stands for kind of a framework for action, ideals, tradition, and heritage. And it's kind of a different way to approach religion than you may be used to. Remember, we're trying to look at religion from something other than simply a collection of factual statements about the universe, and rather see religion as a bundle of traditions and norms and ideals which have a direct effect in how an individual lives their life and how a family or a community or a society has any measure of stability and cohesion and prosperity and resilience. And so it's kind of like looking at religion from that different perspective that we're going to engage on the conversation today. And as usual, I have my partner in crime, Troy Leavitt, to join the conversation. Troy, oh my goodness.
I think I've just about got this whole thing all figured out. You know, evolution, morality. I got it. It just took me a while, so I've been working on this problem for a couple of years, and I think I got it today.
You've used technology to solve the ever-present problems of humanity.
Yes, yeah, which is what we've all been trying to do for years, right? So I've got my Steam Deck here, and I've got my Quest 3. We're ready to let's rock, right? All I need now is a 2-liter bottle of Diet Shasta, maybe Orange Shasta, my All Rush mixtape. We'll be ready to rock.
I would go with reggae over Rush, but that's just me.
That's a Futurama reference.
Yeah.
Anyway,
all you're missing is your waifu AI assistant that can access ChatGPT for Omni for you and do everything that you need it to do.
Yeah. Well, anyway, since we are talking all this stuff about video games as it kind of ties into this whole evolution, we're going to talk today about game theory, which is I think a good place to really dive in. It's a little bit more background, I think, than religion itself, but it's a good place to start.
Well, before we dive into that, I want to do a quick recap of kind of the major themes that we discussed in the first episode or discussion. A lot of people that have looked at this have been like, 3 hours talking about evolution and religion. Are you kidding me? And, I get it. It's just like this new format of long form discussion we're going to just try to dive into and play with. And if nothing else, it's enjoyable for me to chat with somebody who kind of is willing to look at these things from a different perspective. So I appreciate that. So as I thought about, okay, how could I really concisely recap what we discussed last time? It's really taking a step away from seeing religion as just a collection of factual claims, and instead seeing religion as a framework for living. It has a bunch of values and norms and ideas that affect how an individual navigates life, how families and societies and communities interact with each other and prosper or face adversity. And that bundle of traditions, values, and norms evolves over time to adapt to any given environment. And one criticism that I heard was like, you guys are saying that evolution does this and evolution does that. And I don't want to make this a discussion where we're acting like evolution is some sort of God acting proactively. It's more just a name that we give for an understanding of how processes adapt to environments, and that things which survive tend to pass the traits that allow them to survive into the next generation. And that process, taken over and over and over again, starts to shape and form something that doesn't necessarily have a moral, goodness or badness to it. It's just something that which has allowed it to survive. And when that matches with human living, and that's kind of why I added living to this idea of religion as an evolutionary living framework, then that coincides with things that we understand are pretty essential and important to us as humans. So it's an evolving framework for living that evolves over time. And the acronym Living Faith, again, that's the framework for action, ideals, tradition, and heritage. And we can talk, if you look in that episode, we go over a little bit about what that exactly means. And it's really when you look at a religion, not so much as a claim that religious leader X did or received Y, but rather look at in the life of the members of the community and in the community itself, what are the norms, ideals, rituals, milestones of living, principles about how to respond to life's challenges? What are the different mythologies or stories that encode kind of instructions or guidelines or moral principles into a person's life that allow them to handle, the harsh world that exists out there. And it's really looking at it from that perspective. And that's why you can kind of unplug even the founder of a religion from how it, 100 years ago, from how it affects and how people who live it today have their life affected. And then just kind of looking at how that changes over a time and adapts to new environments is important. And when I say new environment, that can take many different forms. It can take new technology that disrupts old kind of established patterns. Certainly the printing press was one example. The internet is another example. It can also be an environment that is a new moral understanding about the world that in its own evolutionary process kind of catches fire. So, going from an older understanding where we believed that different races were actually different species of human, and so there was some way to draw a line between man of one race and non-man of another race, to a more current moral understanding of kind of universal humanity, where we are all the same race and there's just different, genetic threads or environmental circumstances that lead to one collection of people having a different traits than another. So I guess that's kind of the recap of the first discussion. Anything that you would add to that, and or want to expand on that?
Yeah, based on some of the feedback we got last time, I think a lot of our listeners were struggling with, like, what space are you guys exactly in here? Are you pro-religion? Are you anti-religion? Is this just an argument for conservatism? What are you guys actually getting at? And I think what we're getting at is more of a way to understand and explain the importance of religion in human history and how it's played a role. And also, since we're ex-Mormons, how we can look at the LDS Church and see kind of the elements that are positive in there, but also the elements that might be negative or detrimental. So to me, it's really an approach of trying to understand religion as something that humans do, rather than trying to judge religion as an all good or an all bad sort of thing. And we do know that religion has been with humanity for as long as there have been humans. Last time we talked, we put it in this context of evolution, and I brought up Daniel Dennett, who had just recently died just a couple days before, and I have been kind of pushing him lately. In fact, I'm pushing him everywhere I go, because he's like one of the four horsemen of new atheism, but he had a different approach to addressing the questions of religion than I think the others three did. So is it okay? I'll just real quickly touch on the new.
Yeah. No, you've mentioned some of this, and I was really fascinated because I have yet to read any Dennett, and based on your recommendation, I got my Audible account and pulled it down, and have just listened to the first chapter of it. And already I can definitely see what you're talking about. So I'd love to hear more about where you find some resonance there.
Okay, let me just real quickly present my screen here, if that's all right. The new horseman. See if you see this. Do you see that?
Okay, let's see. It's not showing up yet. If you hit the present and then share screen down at the bottom. Oh, hold on.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right, so you can see that, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is the four horsemen of new atheism around 2004 or whatever. These were the guys who were pushing. Really, at the time, people thought they were extremely critical of religion, and three of the four, I think, are. So you've got Richard Dawkins, who was very much against religion, and the book that he wrote. Each of these guys wrote a book at this time that kind of defined their position. So Richard Dawkins' book was The God Delusion. The one that Sam Harris wrote was The End of Faith. The one that Christopher Hitchens wrote was God is Not Great. And you can kind of see a theme, right? It's very anti.
Yeah.
But then the one that Daniel Dennett wrote is called Breaking the Spell. And his approach to it was, rather than treating religion as primarily a negative thing, he recognized that it's something that humans have always done, and that we should subject it perhaps to scientific scrutiny. And that's his book. In fact, I have it. I'll quit sharing my screen now. So if you come back to me, I actually have, Daniel Dennett's Breaking the Spell, and I just kind of have to show this off because I met Dan Dennett a few times. So there he is. It's a signed version. I've got about 3 books signed by Dan Dennett.
Nice.
And what I think is really interesting about Dan Dennett as it relates to the other new atheists and the others who were approaching religion is that Dan really did recognize, hey, this is some important stuff. And so let me just read very quickly the Breaking the Spell, Religion is a Natural Phenomenon, kind of inside book cover bit here, so you get an idea of where Dan Dennett's coming from. And I think that this is worthwhile background for our discussion. So it opens up with, is religion good for you? Should it be the basis for morality? And he says, for many people around the world, perhaps most people, there is nothing more important than religion. It has comforted them in their suffering, become an integral part of their marriages and child-rearing, and encourage group cooperation to achieve ends both magnificent and terrible. Religion plays such a powerful role in the world that we should try to understand it in all its complexities. But most adherents, that is, most people who believe it, bristle at anyone who wants to investigate their practices and beliefs in a scientific manner. So that's where he's coming at. He's like, let's break this down as we would any other science. So then I won't read all of this, but I think this last paragraph here where he says, Breaking the Spell, the name of his book, is not an anti-religious screed, but rather an eye-opening exploration of the role that religious belief plays in our lives, our interactions, and our country. And so Dennett has written a calmly reasoned book and a calmly reasoned and timely book that will be read and debated by believers and non-believers alike. So this is not a book that's aimed at tearing down religion. It's a book that's aimed at explaining and understanding religion primarily in that framework as something humans have always done and as evolved over time. So the reason I wanted to give that all as background is I think that the last time when we were on here, people were like, well, what's your position? I'm like, well, that's kind of my position. Is I'm looking at it not as religion is necessarily a positive, nor as a negative. Same thing with the LDS Church. Instead, I want to take it apart, find out what makes it work, what sort of values might be in there so that we can get better as a species at understanding why religion has played such an important part in our lives. Anyway, so that's I think to me that's an important kind of framing. And also, if anybody's watching the program and they're not quite sure, what the position is, it's neither for me, and it's neither pro-religion or it's anti-religion. It's just understanding the position of religion, which I think as you leave Mormonism or any high-demand religion, being able to view your religion in the context of this long history of other religions and this kind of tableau of religions around the world actually helps you to achieve, I believe, some sense of peace, some sense of understanding. Oh, this was the religion I was raised in. It just happens to be this way, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily a bad thing. Doesn't mean that it's necessarily a good thing. It's just a human thing. And by being able to understand that, it helps you to achieve a sense of peace, but also recognize what values you may want to bring forward, as opposed to, I think, a lot of folks, when they leave their high demand religion like Mormonism, they become oikophobic, right? They hate everything that was ever there before. And so anyway, to me, this is something that you do after you've got through the anger phase, after you've got through those difficult phases. You start thinking about, well, what value did religion have for me? And can I adapt some of it? I think Brittany Hartley, she's out there doing something kind of similar. This is a different approach. Anyway, so that's my background I wanted to throw out there.
Okay, that was exactly the reason why I wanted you in on this discussion, because I've seen you kind of push back against some of the harsh ex-Mormon, tear it all down, it's all bad perspectives, just like you push back against the Mormons who are like all atheists or godless heathens who have no morality, because there is a balance to be had there, or at least a different way of looking at it that takes those black and white considerations out and allows you to look at it from a different perspective. And that's what we're going to do today, because we've talked about how religions somehow have evolved through time and incorporated through mythology, through principles and values, ways kind of like an algorithm or computer programming that the members can then apply in their lives that can either be functional and helpful or destructive. And so one question is like, well, how is it that, resources are limited, the world is harsh, there's danger at every corner, and yet this system has evolved that has a concept of forgiveness or mercy or not looking at the world as dog eat dog? Like, how in the world does that convey any kind of advantage? It seems counterintuitive to our harsh world reality that any system that doesn't include, get all that you can get for yours and damn everybody else, that seems like the rules of the game that should give you the most advantage. Why do some religions, in fact, most religions, have a different way to program your life in the harsh realities of the world? And how could that have come to be? Do you kind of see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, and I think it's a really good deep question, one that has puzzled people for many years. Like, where did we get these moral sentiments at all? Like, why would we ever help each other? Why would we ever be kind to each other? Where did that come in? Especially in a dog eat dog universe, or we talk about the theory of evolution, where it's supposedly survival of the fittest. Isn't everybody killing each other, just trying to get
Yeah.
ahead? And how did we ever reach a point where animals were cooperating and working together, whether humans or wolves or dolphins or anything working together? How did that even come about? And for a long time that was a big mystery, and I think that's what we're going to try and get at now is through game theory. uh, some work has been done there that now is very promising in helping us to understand how this cooperative behavior can be a competitive advantage within certain environments, and that's what game theory, I think, brings to the table as a new way to look at things, that
Now,
is really worthwhile. Yeah.
yeah. So, when I first heard of the concept of game theory, I'm like, okay, that's just like the theory of how people play video games, right?
Right.
But
That's what my wife said too. You guys are going to talk about video games?
if you don't know, Troy comes from the world of video games. His whole
Yeah.
career was in, the creation, overseeing of the production of and distribution, or getting some classic video games out there. So it's kind of fun to have his perspective on it. But when you invoke game theory, what does that mean for the common listener?
Yeah. So rather than being about video games, game theory is really, I guess it's a discipline or an area of study where you have rational agents engaged with other rational agents trying to figure out the best course of action. And so game theory is like, it's the idea of you're playing kind of a simulated game, between different agents, and you're always trying to pick the best result all the way along. So a good way to think of game theory that I think is intuitive is, anybody who's seen the movie War Games? If you haven't, you should see it. It's a little bit older, but at the very end of the movie, there's the computer that's trying to figure out what to do in the case of a nuclear war, and it starts running all these programs, and it's running, tic tac toe, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of games of tic tac toe at the same time. It's running thousands and thousands and thousands of games of chess, and then off to the side, it's running thousands and thousands and thousands of games of nuclear war, right? And so the idea is,
Nuclear war.
yes, go. And so at the very end, the climax of the movie is this computer is trying to, through game theory, it's actually doing game theory, play out thousands of games to learn the correct move to play in a game of global thermonuclear war that it thinks it's about to actually engage in. I don't know if I want to give away the end of the movie, but it does resolve that, right? It says, what is the winning move at the end of the game?
It's been like 40 years. I think you're safe
Yeah.
from accusations of spoilers.
But the end of the game is the game theory, for global thermonuclear war. The computer arrives at the conclusion the only winning move is not to play. And it's kind of a brilliant, like, recognition that for that nuclear war, nobody wins. There is no way to win this, period. And the computer has discovered that through game theory. But game theory, just in general, coming back to what we're talking about here, you can look at it from agents, from whether it be organisms or tribes or groups, always figuring out what is their best course of action as opposed to another group and their best course of action, and back and forth and back and forth. And that becomes game theory. And you can see it becomes incredibly deep, especially if you're working with, geopolitical situations or large groups. And so military is very into game theory about, if we were to attack here, what would they do and what would they do? Anyway, so it's basically simulation of rational agents interacting.
And there's something that you can learn about humanity, but it's kind of just it's not so much humanity itself that's unique to humanity. It's just when you put agents into the world that have an idea of self-preservation and preference, then by putting a bunch of variables in the environment that they're in and then running bunches of simulations, you can just kind of see how it's going to be at the end. And that's, as I've encountered it when I've gone and explored this world of game theory, usually in the introduction, whether you're a student or somebody who's just studying it, you'll be presented with a very simple simulation with a very simple rule set and very limited variables. And then as you go on your journey of learning, they'll start to modify the variables and add additional variables. And every step, you're learning more and more about how rational agents working in a complex environment will make decisions. And it helps us understand about how things like incentive can affect something. And even a very small change can affect something. Things like the distribution of a particular trait within a population, whether it is rare at the starting point or more common at the starting point, all these different things have something to teach us about the nature of how a culture or society engages with itself. So what I'd like to do is, some people have taken this concept of game theory and they've said, well, how can we, through the process of understanding these agents and different incentives, understand how it's possible through running this type of simulation to understand how religions may have evolved moral principles that are counterintuitive to the dog eat dog world that we sometimes project should exist in a harsh environment with scarce resources. And I think by going through that exercise, you can start to understand how it's possible that a group of people together under the umbrella of a religion over time may have become more populated within a space, because the moral principles that ended up surviving and causing greater signal into the next generation ended up increasing the amount of people that would adhere to principles that gradually over time we understand are actually more beneficial to a population working together. And that is with a website called ncase.me. I'll put a link in the descriptions, but there's a particular presentation called The Evolution of Trust that is kind of like a little exercise. It's a journey that you can go on, starting with a very basic rule set, but you're going to learn some basic game theory and then understand how some of this may have evolved over time. So let's go on this journey together. Now, the people who created this, or the creator of this project, is made a name for themselves for doing kind of instructable teaching things where you're learning a concept by playing with something that's very interactive. And that's what makes this presentation so fun. So this is The Evolution of Trust. So we'll just kind of go through it. And I'll read the first part here.
Yeah,
It was Christmas 19. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so you sent this to me when we were prepping for this, and I had seen an earlier version of it, but I really liked this version when I played through it, because it takes it even beyond what some of the earlier versions do. So I think this is a great one. People will really,
Okay.
you know, any watchers are going to come out of this going, oh, okay, I get it now. Yeah, this is a good version.
Okay, so during World War I, peace broke out. It was Christmas 1914 on the Western Front. Despite strict orders not to chillax with the enemy, British and German soldiers left their trenches, crossed no man's land, and gathered to bury their dead, exchange gifts, and play games. Meanwhile, it's 2017. The West has been at peace for decades, and wow, we suck at trust. Surveys show that over the past 40 years, fewer and fewer people say they trust each other. So here's our puzzle. Why, even in peacetime, do friends become enemies? And why, even in wartime, do enemies become friends? I think game theory can help explain our epidemic of distrust and how we can fix it. So, to understand all of this, let's play a game. Would you like to play a game of global thermonuclear war? No, it's not that game. It's this game. I'm clicking the wrong thing. Here we go. Okay, take this one for us, Troy.
All right, so we're going to play the game of trust. You have just one choice. In front of you is a machine. If you put a coin in the machine, the other player gets 3 coins, and vice versa. You both can either choose to cooperate, put in the coin, or cheat, where you don't put in a coin. And so then you can, I guess you probably got control of this, but you can see an example of, I put a coin in, what happens, they cheat or cooperate. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a machine in the center of the screen, and we're on the left with the red hat, and some other random players on the other side on the blue hat. And so I understand the rules. If we go in and put a coin in, we're down a coin because we've given a coin to the machine, but it's going to then give 3 coins to the other person. And if we're lucky, that person is going to put a coin in the machine, and we're going to get 3 coins. And so then we can kind of see how this balance goes. So it's a way for us to either, we have to sacrifice something and hope the other person is also sacrificing, right, so that we both benefit. But we don't have to. We could cheat. We could be like, oh, I'm going to put the coin, but then pull it out at the last second. And then we would get the 3 coins if they did it. But if they cheat too, we get nothing. So what do you think? What should we do? Cheat or cooperate? Are we Machiavellian, or are we compassionate?
Well, let's start by cheating. Let's cheat this guy.
Okay, we're going to cheat. All right. Okay, so exactly, why let the moocher mooch off of you? If you cooperate, if we put a coin in and they cheat, then we lose a coin and they get 3. However, if we both cheat, none of us get anything at all. Therefore, you should cheat, because the worst you can do is lose coin, and the best you
Right.
can do,
Yeah.
if they do you dirty, is nothing.
This is beautiful because it illustrates a single instance, right? If you only were to interact with somebody else just one time, your logical, rational choice is always cheat. If there's only just a one-time deal, yeah, because you're guaranteed not to lose, but you might win.
Right. And then you can kind of put yourself in the mind of the other person and say, well, it's probably to their advantage also to cheat.
Do
So
the
I
same
can
thing. Yeah.
assume they're going to cheat. That's why you kind of want to cheat. Okay. So, but let's say the other player cooperates and puts a coin in. So what should you do now? So now we know they're going to cooperate. What are we going to do?
Yeah. So if we're going to go to a round 2, so we're like, oh, we're playing another round of this game. Well, that person, they cooperated last time. Let's cooperate with them this time and see what they do. Right.
Okay. Let's give it a shot.
Aha.
Sure. Aha. It seems like the right thing to do, or is it? Because if you both cooperate, you both give up a coin to gain 3, and so you're even. But if you cheat and you know they're cooperating, then you gain 3 coins at their cost of 1. Therefore, if we're only looking at your benefit, you should cheat. Because if you cooperate, you're even. But if you cheat, you're up on the deal. And that's our dilemma. Trust is nice, but it can let others take advantage of you or shoot you as you come unarmed out of a trench. Sometimes distrust is rational, but what happens if we play the game more than once? And this is where we enter whenever you look at these game theory videos, because you can find a whole bunch of them online. Generally, what will happen is they'll set up the variables, they'll set up some situation, and then they'll run a simulation that goes over hundreds, if not thousands of times, and they'll show how populations change over time or how resources are affected over time. So let's go. Now we're going into the realm of more than once. Okay, so now let's play for real. You're going to be playing against 5 different opponents, each with their own strategy. With each opponent, you'll play anywhere between 3 to 7 rounds. You won't know in advance when the last round is. Can you trust them, or rather, can they trust you? Pick your first real move. Choose wisely. All right, what do you think?
Well, let's play it like we're cavemen or something. Let's cheat. Let's play the rational move. Let's cheat
all the way. Exactly. We already established that for
Ah, look at that. Look at that. We're ahead. Take that, you little blue capped loser.
Okay, cheat again?
Yeah, let's keep cheating. Maybe this guy's a dummy. Okay, oh, no, he figured out that we were cheating. So now look at that. He's going to cheat too.
Is there any advantage for us changing to cooperate now if he seems to be cheating all the time?
Well, I think if we cooperate now that he's figured it out, then it'll even the score, right? Oh, somebody else. So that was the end of round 1.
All right. That was round 1. That guy had a blue hat? This guy's a purple hat. Okay, what do you think? Should we cheat or?
Well, I think we're doing pretty good. I think we keep cheating. Let's go with cheat for now. Yeah.
Okay.
He came out cheating too. So I don't trust that guy. That guy cheated right out of the gate, just like we did. Look at that. We're cheating all the way down, probably. Yeah, he is.
Why would we not cooperate? What if we cooperate? We're just going to get shot in the foot. So there's no incentive to cooperate anyway. We know he's cheating.
Right. Oh, how about
all right, now we got somebody with the pink hat. They seem nice. Should we cooperate?
Do you want to cooperate? We can try cooperate, but I think you're just being influenced by the pink hat now.
Yeah, a little bit. A little bit. It's my own evolutionary program.
Let's cheat. Let's see how cheating does.
All right. Troy's a cutthroat. We're totally cheating this poor innocent widow.
Hey. Oh, did she tried to cooperate? Oh, good job.
Okay, now she's sad. Look, they added an emotional curve there.
Oh, look at that. Oh, we're just totally taking advantage of this poor person. Oh no, look at that. Wow, we are really rich.
Why don't they learn?
That's right. Must be the red hat we're wearing.
Yeah. Okay, big text with the big 10-gallon hat. We're just going to keep it up. We've already established by our assessment of the situation that we get nothing from doing anything but cheating.
Right, yeah. I'm feeling like we're the smart guys here. We seem to be winning, but we haven't lost anything yet.
Yep.
winning all the way down the line. What's wrong with cheating all the time, John? This isn't helping at all.
Well, who's to say? Who's to
Yeah.
say? All right, we got Sherlock Holmes here. Here we go, cheating again.
All right, our last opponent. Our total score, you can see at the top there, opponent 5 of 5, total score is 21. So we've made 21 coins so far. Look at that. We are just clobbering these guys with our cheating plans.
We are all together evil. Okay. All right. That was the music. The music is like way loud, so I had to turn it off. The sound effects are really good. When you play it, if you go play it on yourself, you should do the sound. All right. Ching. Nothing. Okay. All right. Take this slide for us. Lay it all out for us.
All right. So it says your total score was 27, which ain't bad. The lowest and highest possible scores are 7 and 49, respectively. So who are these strange characters you just played against? And so these were little AI that were doing something. So the copycat was just doing what you did. I start with cooperate, and afterwards I just copy whatever you did in the last round. Meow. And then there's the always cheat with the dark hat there. The strong shall eat the weak, so he cheats every time, and we did see that. And then the always cooperate, which let's be best friends. But you could see in that case, this poor person got taken advantage of. We just like took away all her money. And then the grudger with the yellow cowboy hat. Listen, partner, I'll start cooperating and keep cooperating, but if you ever cheat me, I'll cheat you back till the end of tarnation. So you cheat with this guy once, and he's going to cheat the rest of the way. And then the detective. First, I'll start cooperate, cheat, cooperate. If you cheat back, I'll act like copycat, so I'll fall back to a different format. But if you never cheat back, I'll figure out that I can take advantage of you, and I will become always cheat to exploit you. Elementary, my dear Watson. So the detective is trying to figure out who you are, if you're going to cooperate or copy or what.
Okay, so this is a great slide because this shows you how different decision trees, different algorithms, different kind of rules or principles for how you engage in an interaction can shape the decisions that you make. Now, each of these is kind of a very simplistic sort of way of deciding how you'll enter into an engagement. But as you're listening to and watching this this example, just think about how these principles might be applicable to some other sort of interactions that you may have in the context of a life, because that's where I think starting to understand how religions evolve moral principles can start to take shape. Okay, so now what if these characters were to play against each other? So now we can experiment and we can say, hey, if we put the always cooperate with the grudger, which of those two strategies is the most advantageous? Or if we put the detective with the copycat and so forth. So let's see where we go when we explore these questions. So it's tournament time. Each character will now play against every other character. That's 10 paired matches and 10 rounds per match. Who do you think will get the highest total score? Be careful about it and then place your bets. Think carefully about it and place your bets. So who would you think is going to get the highest total score? It's probably all cheat, right? We were all cheat.
Yeah, all cheat. Yep, we might as well try all cheat since that worked for us. Although I think we're about to discover that all cheat doesn't quite work as well as we think it does. Yep.
So copycat will start with cooperate, then it'll just repeat whatever you did. So if you cheat, it's going to cheat. Always cooperate is no matter what going to cooperate. Grudger is going to start with cooperate, and then if you cheat even once, it'll always cheat. Detective will figure you out, and then either copycat or always cheat. So we're going to start with all cheat. All right, you place your bet on always cheat. Now let's go through the matches one by one and see how the tournament plays out. First match, all cheat. Let's see.
Yeah, to me, to arrive at this always cheat is kind of a rational thing because we tried it once. We realized that cheating worked pretty well. This seems like a good path, right? Let's cheat. It makes sense to me, right?
Okay, so the first match is always cheat is fighting copycat. And copycat, once it discovers that you're cheating, just cheats the whole time. So the first time it loses to you and then it just goes.
Right.
And says, oh, by the way, next match, copycat versus always cooperate rounds.
Yeah, so the always cooperate earned 20 because she started cooperating right out of the gate, and Copycat copied her the rest of the way. So
Yeah.
she's actually got 20 points. We've only got 3 now. Uh-oh. Let's go to the next match.
Copycat versus Grudger.
Right. So we're actually going to play through all the different potential matches where they all play each other to see how the strategies work in this environment of just 5 entities playing against each other.
Okay, now Detective was going to figure out what you did and then game the system. Not every trench joined the piece, but it was pretty widespread. Many front lines came up with the idea independently, and again, despite specific strict orders not to. Always cheat versus always cooperate.
Right. So that's where always cheat really does well. Yeah. But you can see her numbers went way down because she was ahead, but then we took a bunch of her coins by cheating her of them. So, yeah.
And in fact, even before Christmas, several front lines had already established an unofficial secret peace. Always cheat versus Grudger. They called it the live and let live system. Basically, you don't shoot me and I don't shoot you. And this worked in a lot of places. Okay. So we're just starting to see how these different strategies match up against each other. You may be skeptical. Most soldiers don't spontaneously form peace with the enemy. What's so special about trench warfare? Always cheat versus detective. So what went on here for this one? So for this one, detective cooperated first, saw that you cheated, then both cheated.
Yeah, so the detective had a built-in thing where it would start by trying to cooperate, and then it would try to cooperate twice more to see, right? And when you cheated at both times, it locked into, I'm going to cheat the rest of the round.
As soon as it figured it out that, as soon as it figured out that you were going to be a cheater, then it closed the door. Yeah. Okay, always cooperate versus the Grudger. Well, this is unique about the trenches. Unlike almost every other form of war, you have to face the same specific soldiers every day. So you start to learn about the tendencies and inclinations of the soldiers.
Yeah, that's a good important part that they just brought up. Yeah, the trench where the soldiers in the trenches knew the other soldiers in the other trenches because they've been shooting at them for months. Yeah.
It's a repeated game, and that makes all the difference. Knowing your opponent and their inclinations. And now the Grudger versus the detective. We can kind of see how these strategies mount up as they go against each other. Drum roll, please. Okay, who was the winner? The winner was, we can kind of see each of the strategies here after they've played tournaments against each other. We can see how they've netted in the end, and it is the copycat that ended up having more than all the others. Now, the copycat goes by many names. The golden rule, reciprocal altruism, tit for tat, or live and let live. That's why peace could emerge in the trenches of World War I. When you're forced to play the same game with the same specific people, not just the same generic enemy, over and over again, copycat doesn't just win the battle, it wins the war. But if things change a lot when you play multiple rounds of a game, what if we play multiple tournaments? So we just experienced one tournament, and now they're saying, well, is this just a fluke, or is this something that we're going to see is consistent over time? Anything to add to this?
I think what's really interesting about this, as it points out, the tit for tat ends up being the winning strategy, and that's a bit of a surprise, I think, when you first think about it, because it seems, at least to me, there's an intuitive well, always cheat. You're guaranteed to never lose in that case, right? Because you're always cheating, so you can only win, right? The thing is you miss out. You miss out on all the opportunities for winning, and so you end up falling behind, as you can see with our 45 score, behind the guy who is taking advantage of those opportunities to cooperate when they come up. So the always cheat ends up losing because there's cooperators out there in the environment that you don't get to get the benefits of. So that's kind of why. Right. So even though it seems like it's a rational position, it turns out being maybe not rational in the long term.
Okay, so let's go to multiple tournaments. Now, okay, they've changed our perspective here. Okay, so now let's let our population of players evolve over time. It's a 3-step dance. First, play a tournament. Let them all play against each other and tally up their scores, just like we did. 2, we're going to eliminate the losers, get rid of the 5 worst players. If there's a tie, pick randomly between them. And then 3, reproduce winners. Clone the 5 best players, and if there's a tie, pick randomly between them. And repeat this for as long as you'd like. So now we're entering into the realm of just seeing how a particular algorithm works in the context of one exchange to add that evolutionary component. Remember in our last discussion, you mentioned that there were 5 different components of evolution, and part of that was having some sort of trait pass into the next generation if it survives some sort of evolutionary pressure. And so now we're adding that component to this. Now it's more than just game theory, it's a form of evolutionary game theory. So let's see this in action.
Yeah, we're adding generations plus selection pressure now. We're eliminating people who aren't doing well, which would be in evolution, that would be extinctions. That would be
right. And then the ones who are doing well actually increase in number so that we can see over generations how that works. So say we start with the following population. Okay, so we have 15 players who always cooperate, 5 always cheat, and 5 copycats. So you can see the populations depicted by the different hats and colors. Now, we're going to do the tournament, eliminate, reproduce, dance a dozen times or so. Let's make another bet. Who do you think will win in the first tournament? So we've got so many people who always cooperate, but we've also got some cheaters and copycats. Who's going to win?
So we know for sure that
Mary Sue's.
Well, because this is multi-generational, I think what we'll see is all cheat will come out great because it's going to exploit all those cooperators right out of the gate, right? It's going to exploit the heck out of them. But then those cooperators are going to die off. And then once those cooperators die off, it's going to be against copycats. But copycats are going to be playing other copycats too. So I think we're going to see the copycat win this one again because the copycat will be able to take advantage of the benefits while still being a bit insulated against the negatives.
Okay. We're going to go with copycat.
That's my guess.
Okay, this makes sense. Copycat won the tournament last time. Why not again? Let's see if you're correct. So we're going to play the first tournament. It's going to do all the exchanges. We can see the total tallies up there. So you can see their numbers there. We're going to eliminate the bottom 5. And it was all the Mary Sues who got eliminated. And we're going to reproduce the top 5. So the ones who did the best are going to increase in number. All right. Copycat didn't actually win.
Not in the first round, but yeah.
But they didn't do as bad as always cooperate. They got eaten up by always cheat, whose numbers have now increased by 5. But let's give a few more rounds of this. Let's play our tournament, eliminate the bottom 5, reproduce the top 5. We can see that the ratio is changing.
All right. Looks like cheaters are winning.
Yep. So let's do it again. Play the tournament, eliminate the bottom 5. There go all of the altruists, and reproduce the top 5. Now, the always cooperate are dead. They were stupid. They deserve to die. Goodbye. So now, play tournament. So now we've got a different environment. Now it's copycats versus cheaters. And so we're going to eliminate the bottom 5. Bam. Okay. And then reproduce the top 5. Okay, our population is shifting now. Rather than just gaining cheaters, we're actually gaining copycats and losing some cheaters. Do it again. Bam. Eliminate the bottom 5, reproduce the top 5. We're seeing a significant shift. So by simply copying the other player's moves, copycats can play nice with each other while always cheats just cheat themselves because the cheaters are also going to engage with other cheaters. Not only that, but it means that copycat can always give cheat a taste of their own medicine. Do it again. Bam. Eliminate the bottom 5, reproduce the top 5. And so, as a result, play the tournament again, eliminate the bottom 5, reproduce the top 5. Copycat inherits the earth. So in the long run, you were right. Copycat wins. Always cheat may have won in the short run, but its exploitativeness was its downfall. And this reminds me of a quote: "We are punished by our sins, not for them." Albert Hubbard. Anything to add to this as we finish this part of the game?
Yeah, one of the things that unless you're paying close attention, while we watch that, the numbers for the copycats actually start to get higher and higher and higher over time as they interact with more and more copycats. So you also see kind of this runaway effect that happens, that the cheaters at first are exploiting, but as soon as you start to get just a few cooperators working with another few cooperators, they get an advantage that becomes quickly insurmountable. And you can see that number just ratchet up really quick in those last few rounds, so that the cheaters who never get advantage like that because they're always cheating fall behind rapidly, which I think is really interesting. That you'd think the cheaters would last longer, but they don't. They only last as long as they have somebody to exploit. As soon as they have somebody who's tough enough not to let themselves be exploited, the cheaters lose out.
And it's like you can already start to extrapolate that into our understanding of human psychology and society, and you start to think that you know, if you're in an environment where you know everybody is only going to act in malicious self-interest and hesitate not at all to do you in for their own benefit, then you can see that's a completely different environment to exist in than an environment where you know that people will try to cooperate and will only shut that valve off if they encounter other people who don't also try to cooperate. So it totally changes the landscape. Okay, so, oh, and by the way, what's next? The result is similar even if we put grudger and detective back in. Okay, so we eliminated some strategies for that last simulation, and maybe it was just that mix. So now we're going to try another simulation. We're going to have all the different strategies in there, and we're going to start the evolution process. It's going to be faster this time, though. They're going to do the game, eliminate, replicate, and run the simulation. There it goes. And again, we end up with all copycats. Now, sometimes a few grudgers may stick around because when all players except grudger and copycat are eliminated, the two tie. So it seems the math of game theory is telling us something, that copycat's philosophy of do unto others as you would have them do unto you may not just be a moral truth, but also a mathematical truth. Now, what do you think about that statement? Is that true, or is that just like they got some religion, they got some Bible Christians in there programming this to try to trick us up?
I think that it's a testament to the power of selection and evolution. That the do unto others, what we take as moral truths may actually be these mathematical truths written into our genes. I guess is another way to look at it. Is that what we have evolved to have these senses of helping one another, working out with one another, may be the mathematical best way for our species to have gone, not necessarily something that had to be imposed from outside. And I think that's something that's really worth understanding, that it's just the best solution to the given dilemma or problem that we were in, provided, and there's always these contexts you have to be within a certain community of enough other cooperators who are willing to do this. But it does seem to be that it's not about morality here, it's about math, right? It's just about, if you run the numbers enough times, crank this out, the ones who are cooperating and who are taking advantage will get that advantage in the long run.
And to me, this also explains, some people will make the observation that in totally different parts of the world, in totally different eras of time, and in totally different religious and cultural contexts, some moral principle or value will show up or survive, these evolutionary processes and become dominant, that are very similar to each other, even though they're completely independent of each other. And they're bringing up the golden rule, or tit for tat, or do unto others as you would have do unto you, which is one of those things that tends to show up in a whole bunch of different moral and ethical traditions that are completely disconnected from each other. And some people say, well, that's just God's hand showing his truth to different cultures. Or you could say this is just the result of this type of mathematically predictable evolutionary process happening. And again, we're not using evolution to say evolution is providing an active hand. What we're saying is that these different strategies, the people who hold on to them and pass them into the next generation are the ones that survive, and the ones who don't, the signal of that strategy disappears or it gets diminished over time. And so it's that you're looking at what survives, not that you're saying at the beginning, this is going to survive. We're learning about what survives by seeing the end result. And that's what's challenging about these things, is it's tempting to look at it at the front end, but we don't necessarily know, because remember, some of these things are counterintuitive. So we don't necessarily know what it'll be. All right, so it mentions there's a problem. So what do we suppose that problem is? Let's look. All right, take this one for us, if you would.
Yeah, so look around. The world is full of total jerkwads. If copycat is a strategy in this repeated game of trust that's so powerful that even soldiers in World War I trenches independently evolved a similar strategy called live and let live, why then are there so many untrusting, untrustworthy people? What's causing our epidemic of untrust? A clue in that sentence itself. In this repeated game of trust, so far we've only talked about change in the players. What about a change in the game? Could that lead to the evolution of distrust? So now we're going to talk about the mathematical underpinnings of this.
Okay. So let's
like,
take a look. The evolution.
The numbers that we're throwing at this. Yeah.
Okay. So before everything goes to heck, let's start with something nice. So here's a world, cue butterfly and bird sounds. Here's a world filled almost entirely with always cooperate, except for one always cheat and one copycat. Use the buttons to start the simulation or go step by step or reset it. So what do you think? Who's going to win? Well,
yeah, I think that cheater is going to exploit so much of those always cooperates that he's going to get very rich very fast. And then he'll be able to multiply, and we might end up with a problem where the cheaters end up dominating.
Okay, well, should we go step by step?
Eliminate. Look at those big numbers on the cheater. He gets big numbers. You see the little numbers at their feet. Yeah.
As you already know, copycat wins handily in the long run under our current rules, but that's under our current rules. Let's go ahead and just, let's see, which is to say that players play against each other for 10 rounds per match. Does copycat still win at 7 rounds, 5 rounds, 3, 2, 1? Change the number of rounds with the slider below and then start the sim and see what happens. So let's reset it. I want to go ahead and run it at the current 10 rounds per match and see what happens. This is now running the game 10 times. There it goes. We're seeing the population change. We're seeing exactly kind of what we saw before was that the cheaters initially exploit all of the do-gooders, and then it's cheater versus copycat, and then the copycat gains the advantage. And you alluded to before, that's because the copycat leaves itself open to the benefits of cooperation while having the safety of defensiveness from cheating. Whereas the cheaters only cheat and they don't open themselves up to the benefits of mutual cooperation. Okay, so but let's reset this now. Let's say, is that true if we're only playing for 5 rounds? Because that was a 10 round. Let's do it for 4 rounds and let's start. Okay, wow.
Total different outcome there. And look at all the cheaters are all broke too. They're all zeros. They've got nobody to exploit. They're all starving to death.
They ran out of other people's taxes. All right, so let's reset this. Okay, well, hold on. So let me understand this. So this is now, it's going in perpetuity, but for each one, there's a certain number of rounds that it plays per match. Okay. So if we change it instead to 8, we'll hit start. Okay.
Yeah.
So at 8, and then look at the numbers. The numbers are pretty good.
Yeah. So that's a healthy society there. That one's got, plenty of food or whatever.
So if we change it to 6, did we do 6 before? Let's try that.
5 before. Yeah. So there's going to be kind of this interesting sweet spot where the copycats get on top. I think we'll probably always end up with copycats with long run, but in those short runs, you're going to see cheaters.
Okay, I'm going to 20
probably
now.
The secret is long run versus short run.
Okay, yeah, this is just doing, it seems like there's a threshold over which it's always the copycats that win, and then under which it's always the cheaters that win.
Cheaters, yeah.
Okay, well, what are we supposed to learn from that? Okay, once you're done playing around, click continue. All right, take this slide for us.
So it says, as you saw, if you don't play enough rounds, here 5 or less, always cheat dominates. So in 1985, when Americans were asked how many close friends they had, the most common answer was 3. In 2004, the most common answer was 0. Now we have fewer friends across class, racial, economic, and political lines because we have fewer friends, period. And as you just discovered for yourself, the fewer repeat interactions there are, the more distrust will spread. And then it has the little parenthetical. No, mass media doesn't count. It must be two-way interactions between specific individuals. So, they're talking about that back and forth in order for this game theory to apply.
So what is our solution here?
It's kind of making the case that, the more repeat interactions you have, the more friends you have, the more likelihood, and it's kind of obvious, but you'll build trust with those friends because you see them all the time. You interact with them all the time. If they're your work friends or whatever, your trust will go up, as opposed to, intermittent interactions where you have very few friends. The likelihood or instancing of cheating because of the economic pressures is different, will go up and could even take over if there's not enough interaction, as we're seeing from this little game theory demo. But it gets worse. Uh-oh.
Oh, there's another way to breed distrust. That's nice. Here are the payoffs for the trust game. So we've got, remember, this is our certain thing where you're giving 1 coin and you get 3 back, and that changes. With the normal payoffs, the copycat wins, but now change both the both cooperate reward. So if both cooperate, that's this one here, from +2 to +1, and then click start. So if we change this, so first I'm going to run the whole thing with the current rule set, and we see the same thing that we saw before. First the cheaters, then the copy. Okay, so I'm going to reset it. Now we're going to change both cooperate to 1.
Right.
So
we've reduced the incentive structure now for our copycat and also for our cooperators, the always play together ones. They're not going to make as much money as they were before now.
Okay. So hit start. What's happening? Damn.
Yeah. So
that didn't take long. So no other variable will change. It's just that the benefit of cooperation was reduced.
Yes, which I think is also pretty important too, right? If the cooperation value isn't high enough, cheating is favored.
Okay. So let's keep going. The same thing happens with a lower win-win reward. Always cheat, always takes over. Game theory has 2 powerful ideas about this. The first is the zero-sum game. This is the sadly common belief that a gain for us must come at a loss to them, and vice versa. A non-zero-sum game. This is when people make the hard effort to create a win-win solution, or at least avoid a lose-lose. Without the non-zero-sum game, trust cannot evolve. Speaking of which, now let's look at our third and final barrier to the evolution of trust. What do you think about that? The zero-sum game versus the non-zero-sum game?
Yeah, I think it makes a brilliant point that you need to have a non-zero-sum environment in order for trust to develop. The other way of putting that is you must have a benefit to cooperating. There has to be some benefit for working together with somebody else in order for trust to develop, as we're seeing in this. So if you're in an environment where there's no benefit to cooperating, trust is unlikely to develop. And this, applies both in our social groups, but, it applies also historically, evolutionarily too, that you'd actually need to have a ratchet where organisms that are working together would benefit more than ones that were not in order for it to even get started. So that's why you'll see cooperation in like mammals, but you won't really see it in like lizards or something.
Interesting. So I find it fascinating that they say that the zero-sum game is the belief that the gain for us must come at a loss to them. And the same thing for the non-zero-sum game is that these things exist as ideas in your mind that then guide your behavior or the environment that you believe that you're in. So if you believe that it's a zero-sum game, then that's going to affect the choices that you made. It's going to make it more likely that you're going to be a cheater rather than a cooperator because you have that assumption about the environment. And to me, that is where, once you look at the broad history, not only of religious traditions, but even cultural and economic traditions, just take the difference of the labor theory of value versus the subjective theory of value, that are some of the core differences between a form of socialism, Marxist type analysis of economics versus more Austrian economics kind of perspective. One of which sees any particular resource that's created representing a certain amount of labor, and that labor has a particular value for it. And then if the capital, or if the producers sell it for more than the labor that went into it, then that represents the amount of exploitation or value stolen from the worker. That's a very zero-sum game sort of way of looking at it. Whereas if you take the subjective theory of value, you're saying that people have different priorities and subjective valuations of something. And so when you determine a price and come together, both sides believe they are getting the better of the transaction, because one side would rather have the object that they're purchasing and the other side would rather have the cash that comes from it, because they have different valuations both for the money, the object, and then time. And it's a different way of conceptualizing an economic system. So that's an aside, but I think this is a really important concept that is worth contemplating.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I'm glad you pointed out the difference in belief and how people value things, because really market forces are an exploration of efficiency. So like, for example, in this case, we're always using coins, which is the exact same thing. But if like I was a shoemaker and I had a surplus of shoes, shoes are worth a lot less to me than your coin is, because I make them cheap, right? So, and that's the market force. To me, it's worth less than it is to you. Whereas to you, you'd rather spend your money to get my shoes that I'm making. That is a non-zero sum game where we value things a little bit differently. And so there's that opportunity for the efficiency of me making a product, in this case, shoes, being more efficient than if I had you make your shoes, right? It's more efficient for you to buy your shoes than it is for you to try and make them. There's the non-zero sum. I'm more efficient at this, so I charge a little more for it, and we start that ratchet up, just like we see with copycats, because we're cooperating now, and both of us are benefiting.
Right. And if you want a really fascinating exploration of how this concept of subjective value and money, allowing that, bridging the gap between people with different values of different things, the Francisco de Anconio money speech from Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand is like, that is a mind-blowing thing. You can say whatever you want about Ayn Rand in the end game, in the long term or whatever, but just read that speech and think about it. It's really fascinating. You can just Google Francisco de Anconio money speech, and it's really fascinating. There's a fun reading of that. Okay, so let's go into mistakes. What about mistakes? Okay.
So this is the part.
Tell me about it.
I just wanted to say that when you sent this to me, this is all new. This was stuff that at the first time I had seen one of these, they did not have this this next bit, because I think this is really fascinating what we're moving into now, which is another level of the evolution of trust. And this is kind of new stuff. This is economic theory and stuff is really looking more at this direction of, well, wait, we can maybe make the copycats even better. And how do we do that? So anyway, this is really fascinating and kind of new. Yeah.
Okay. So as cool as copycat is, it has a huge fatal weakness that I haven't mentioned yet. To understand the problem, let's say two copycats are playing against each other. Being nice players for their first move, it will be to cooperate. Ding. Okay, so you cooperate, they cooperate, everybody gets +2. And normally they just pay back each other's kindness and sing kumbaya until the end of time. But what if, while trying to reciprocate goodness, mistakes, miscommunications, misinterpretations, accidents happen all the time in real life? But if the other person doesn't think it was an accident.
Oh, yeah, because copycat thoughts that you just cheated him, so he's going to cheat you back. Yep. But I'm a copycat on the other side. Yeah.
Right. The other player, being a copycat, had to retaliate, and you, being a copycat as well, will also have to retaliate. Now, remember, we know these are copycats because we can see the color of their hats, but we have to imagine in the simulation, they don't actually know that the other is a copycat, and that's how we can understand why this statement makes sense. So now they both have to cheat. Thus, like the Hatfields and McCoys, these two copycats will spiral into an endless cycle of vengeance that started over a single mistake long ago. Tragic. But now, are there other types of players who can deal with mistakes? Perhaps a color and shape of hat that we have yet to encounter?
Yes.
What do you think?
I think this is brilliant, because now they start saying, what do we do about the real world, like where people make mistakes, and how do these strategies work when it's mathematically fixed, but in our deterministic chaos world that we live in, where everything's going wild, maybe we need more than just simple payback when you screw me up. Somebody screwed me, let's pay them back. That's like the grudger idea or the copycat idea. Let's
Yeah.
look at new strategies. Yeah.
Okay, some new faces or hats anyway. Okay, take it for us.
Copy Kitten. Hello, I'm like Copycat, except I cheat back only after you cheat me twice in a row. After all, the first one could be a mistake. Purr. So this one's going to forgive you for making a mistake. You'll give you one mistake.
That's the George W. Bush one. Cheat me once, shame on you. Cheat me twice,
Yes.
you can't cheat me again. Anyway.
Yeah, that was that funny thing. All right, so what simpleton?
Next is
Hi. Yeah, go ahead.
I try to start cooperate. If you cooperate back, I do the same thing as last move, even if mistake. No, even if it mistake. If you cheat back, I do opposite thing as last move, even if it mistake. Okay, they made him a real simpleton. I was having a hard time reading that. I try start cooperate. If you cooperate back, I do same thing as last move, even if mistake. If you cheat back, I do opposite thing as last move, even if mistake. I think I'm gonna have to see that in action.
Oh, yeah. And then the last one, they just do random. It's just going to do whatever. Monkey Robot, Ninja Pizza Tacos. Lo, I'm so random. Just plays cheat or cooperate randomly 50-50.
Okay, so
we're
let's
going to throw these guys into our tournament. Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with a dozen always cooperate versus our old winner, the fair copycat, and then these new characters, the forgiving copy kitten, the dull simpleton, and the silly random. In each round of a match, players have a small chance of making a mistake. We'll put it at 5%. Who do you think will come out on top? Think carefully, then place your bets. So 5% of the time, they're not actually going to perform according to their programming, except for random because he has no programming. So who do you think?
Let's see. In this condition, there are no cheaters. They haven't put any cheaters in this particular mix. So the all cooperate is probably going to do all right because they're going to be able to cooperate with the others. But the simpletons and the randoms, I think, are going to throw a real wrench into the mix. I don't know. I'm going to put my bets on Coffee Kitten just because I think the mistakes that are going to that 5% mistakes is going to, that's a 1 in 20 chance. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the one that really has forgiveness, limited forgiveness.
Limited forgiveness. Yeah.
Yeah, as its thing. He's forgiving maybe 70 times 7. I don't know if it's that high, but at least it's once or twice.
I'll forgive you once.
Yeah. All right, we bet that Copy Kitten wins. Let's find out. Use the controls to your left, start the sim in quick mode, or go. Okay, we're gonna just do it again. Bam! Here he goes. Wow, you're kidding.
Oh, the simpleton is going crazy.
What in the world? All right, your bet was close, but no cigar. Simpleton wins because Simpleton is actually capable of exploiting always cooperate. They both start cooperating, but if Simpleton makes a mistake and cheats, since always cooperate never retaliates, it just keeps cheating them.
So the mistake of the simpleton discovers a strategy. It's like, oh, if I cheat, they always cooperate. I'll just keep doing that because I keep making money, even though it discovered it as a mistake, which is interesting.
Okay, so let's try the same thing as before. Instead of half always cooperate, it's half always cheat. It's much less forgiving and more hostile as an environment. Who do you think will win now? Place your bets. Simpleton? I have a hard time understanding the simpleton. Okay, so simpleton's going to start with cooperating. And then if you cooperate in the last round, it's going to repeat the same move it did last time, even if that's an accident. So it may accidentally cheat. And if you cooperated and it cheated, then it's going to just keep cheating because that seemed to work for it. But if you cheated in the last round, it's going to switch its last move, even if it was an accident. So it has a way of recovering from the all cheat thing. Okay, well, even though it's simpleton in its algorithm, it's hard for me to conceptualize how that plays out. Okay, so where are our bets? Are we going to just say, well, maybe the simpleton will prevail again?
Yeah. I still got to go with Copy Kitten. That's my
Okay.
guess.
You
But
favor
although
forgiveness. Okay.
Copy Kitten lost though, when there were
Uh,
a lot of simpletons around, which is interesting.
okay. All right. There's our copycats yet again. And then,
Here come the kittens.
interesting. But it seems like you can't totally eliminate
Copycats.
copycats. Copy Kitten wins. That's surprising that even with a meaner starting population, Copy Kitten, a more forgiving version of Copycat, was the most successful. Copy Kitten is so forgiving it doesn't even entirely wipe out Copycat, it shares room. In this case, a bit of miscommunication, 5% chance of making a mistake, could lead to more forgiveness. But is this true for all levels of miscommunication? What if we increase the amount of miscommunication to 50%?
Right, now we're in
Something
trouble.
like that. Because then it's hard. It's kind of like if everybody's the Joker and you can't figure out what they're going to do next, then what do you do? All right, so use the slider below to change the amount of miscommunication, then hit start. So if we were to go to like 50%, then that's almost like everyone is a random. At 5%, Copy Kitten wins. What happens at 0%? So if everyone is a perfect communicator, nobody makes a mistake. Let's do that one first.
Okay.
Bam. Okay, everybody is who they are, and we kind of have that copycat, copy kitten, evolutionary equilibrium.
Yep. And it looks like
Actually,
eventually it goes to Copycat. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. All right. Okay, so now let's just introduce the possibility, 1% chance of miscommunication. See if that still happens. This is just like it's not. It's like approaching no miscommunication.
Isn't that interesting? Just a 1%
That
chance. Copy
that
Kitten
is
starts
really
to
interesting.
dominate. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like having forgiveness as part of your programming becomes really, really important and advantageous, even in a setting of near perfect but not perfect communication. Okay, so now let's go to, instead of 5%, we're going to go to 20%. So we've got now a significant amount of miscommunication or accidents. Let's see what
Yeah. 1 out
happens.
of 5, they'll be making a
Oh,
mistake.
damn.
Oh, the cheater crushes. It's
Yeah,
over.
that did not take long at all. Okay, and what about 50%?
Probably the
Bam.
same thing, I'd be a guess. But
Interesting.
oh, look at Random sticking around.
Yeah. I mean,
Simpleton and
he's just
Random. Look at
reflecting.
that.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of makes sense because Random is a 50-50 chance of doing something.
Yeah.
So,
And then the ones who would cheat always are 50% of the time not cheating because of the mistake thing.
and eventually they win out.
That is really interesting. All right, so let's continue. Okay, so the results turn out something like this. At 0%, fair copycat wins. At 1 to 9%, the copy kitten wins. At 10 to 49%, the unfair always cheat wins. And at 50%, nobody wins ever. This is why miscommunication is such of an interesting barrier to trust. And when it says nobody wins ever, everybody's basically doing random stuff there. So, even though we were seeing a bunch of hats, it could be anyone. And I guess that you
Right.
run
Yeah.
that a bunch of times and you'll probably see over 100 different times you run the simulation, a different group will win. This is why miscommunication is such an interesting barrier to trust. A little bit of it leads to forgiveness, but too much and it leads to widespread distrust. And I think our modern media technology, as much as it has helped us increase communication, it has increased our miscommunication much more. What do you think about that? That's interesting.
Yeah, I think that, well, like as it said earlier, when you used to have a lot of friends, people you could trust as reliable resources, the general trust went up because you had a lot of interactions. And then, yeah, as our miscommunication here, the modern media technology, even though it allows us to interact more, there's more mistakes, there's more miscommunication, there's more lies being told, there's more of this whole miasma of people being fed false information or learning false information. So it's really hard to know who's telling you the truth and who isn't.
Right. And the other thing to think of is that in this game, miscommunication means that somebody has done something in the last turn that has communicated to you about who they are, what their values are, whether they're a cheater or not. And so you have a bit of knowledge that does not actually reflect who they actually are. And so if we translate that paradigm into our modern social media age, are we getting information about other groups of people that is a misrepresentation of what they actually are? So if you have internalized a belief system or an ideology that says all people of this particular category are bad in this particular way, and if that is not actually true, then that is a form of miscommunication that we're seeing in this type of model breeds mistrust and makes it harder for a society to get the benefit of mutual cooperation. And so if a religious or cultural paradigm is in place that gives you a higher signal or a higher confidence that you actually can see people for who they are, then that it at one point decreases that mistrust, but it increases the possibility that you'll get the benefit of the cooperation. And I think that it's hard to really conceptualize that in this game. You really have to ask yourself what's really going on and how can we apply that into our modern society. Okay. At last, let's experiment with all the numbers, the knobs, and the sliders. Let's play in the sandbox mode. All right, this is interesting. Okay, so here we have the ability to kind of game as much as we want to. It is optional. We can play around a little. Anything you wanted to see kind of go along with each other here?
I think that we learned kind of the main lessons. It's fun just to play with this, and I would encourage other people to do it just to get a sense of how different populations, impact the outcomes of these multiple generations of running the simulation. But to me, one of the most interesting things, and I alluded to it earlier, was that it arrived at something I have seen in other books, like in Matt Ridley's book, The Origins of Virtue, which says that when they run these economic simulations, trying to figure out how maybe altruism or cooperation evolved in organisms, they discovered that forgiveness, this tit for tat plus a little bit of leeway, tends to be the one that wins. And it wins repeatedly in a lot of these simulations that they do, which to me is very fascinating. That forgiveness is actually a competitive advantage in the long run. And that's kind of a fascinating thing to think about.
When we talk about the different algorithms or guiding principles that allow the growth of the signal of those principles in future and subsequent generations, it can be hard to translate like a simulation to this to an individual's life. How is it that forgiveness and the golden rule as a competitive advantage result in more of that signal existing in the culture 4 generations down the way? And so the missing block in that understanding for me, as I try to understand it, is like, if that principle in the span of one individual's life and one family's life gives them more advantage in the accumulation of resources, the stability of a cohesive unit that is able to foster a family, keep it together, and then replicate those ideas into the next generation, which means you have to be around to actually bring up your kids in a stable, cohesive family environment and impart those values and principles. And maybe it's more than just your family that does it. Maybe it's also the local community that historically has been heavily influenced by a church paradigm or a religious paradigm, that is part of that replication that then makes it into subsequent generations. And that's where I want to make sure that the viewer is kind of keeping in mind, or at least contemplating the possibility that that we're talking about simple 1 variable, 2 variable things here, but when you put it in the life of an actual human being in the context of a family and society, there's so many different things that have all evolved and gone through their own competitive dynamics with other ways of existing throughout time. And what we're seeing that has survived and gained prominence throughout time is the result of the integration of all those different things into an individual's life. All right, should we go to the, go ahead.
I was going to say one of the things that I like about this little demonstration too is that it shows you that these are like little miniature communities that they're running this simulation in. And when you think about it and you put yourself in that position, if you wanted to be part of a community, you're almost certainly going to want to be in a copycat, copy kitten community as an individual. And so if you're in a community that is valuing those things, either, you know, tit for tat style of justice or forgiveness, you can see mathematically you're in an advantageous position because everybody else is doing that too, if they all share those same values. And so I think there's a lesson to be learned that in your given community, the certain values that they adopt may translate directly into your success, not only within the local group, but within the larger groups too, because they're also all competing with each other as well, different religions with different groups. And I just think that that's a really important way to look at it, is through the context of who am I interacting with and what role does this play?
Yeah, and I want to bring that home to this it's almost a meme in the ex-Mormon world and in the Mormon world, which is this concept of, okay, you're going to leave the Mormon church, where will you go? And it seems like, you know, at one level of analysis, it's a thought terminating cliche. It's just something that people say to invoke fear about the unknown in the outside world and keep people insulated within the Mormon community. But after you've gotten through the processing all of that and you've looked out at what it's like to live in different environments that have different social rules, expectation, norms, and ideals, then you may look back and reflect on what it actually means to exist in different milieus where different social rules are at play. And you might actually find that the rules that evolved to shape what you grew up with in either Mormon or some other religious or cultural paradigm had some benefits. And, you know, if you're in an environment, as you say, where most of the people that you're surrounding yourself by are living their lives according to this copy kitten with forgiveness paradigm, that the experience of living in that environment is going to be different from if you're living in an environment where a majority of the people around you are operating according to the rules of the cheater. Or of even the harsh punisher, who's only going to let you trip up once and then is always going to act in their own self-interest without the dimension of forgiveness. So that's something that I think has been the source of a lot of my own contemplation about this journey. Anything to say about that, Troy?
Yeah, I'm much on the same page. That we're looking at them as individuals here, which is important. But any of those little individuals could be looked at as a group, or it could be looked at as, you know, a smaller organization interacting with other organizations. So there's a scalar value to this whole way of looking at it, that you can do it from the individual level, what's best for the individual, but you can also start to look at it from a group level of, this group has this set of values, this group has this set of values. If we run a bunch of, you know, cycles of this, which group actually does better? The group that has forgiveness, or the group that, you know, is repentant grievance? You know, we're going to go and pay everybody back for anything that's ever been wrong in the past. And you can see mathematically that these two groups are likely in the long term to go one way or the other, provided, of course, the benefits and the economic paybacks are all there. But it's kind of counterintuitive when you stop and think about it, that the group that's the soft, kind, forgiving one might be the group that actually wins out mathematically in the long run, even though in the short term they seem like they're way too soft or way too kind, or, you know, they don't care about justice or something. Yeah.
All right, well, let's take a look at the next page, which is what we learned today. Sum it all up for us. So, all right, why don't you take this for us, Troy?
All right. So game theory has shown us three things we need for the evolution of trust. One, you need repeat interactions. Trust keeps the relationship going, but you need the knowledge of possible future repeat interactions before trust can evolve. That's very important. Like if you're just interacting with somebody once, it's hard to develop trust with them, which makes sense. All right, so
two possible win-wins. So you must be playing a non-zero sum game, a game where it's at least possible that both players can be better off, that you can have a win-win situation.
Right, crucial. And then three, we need low miscommunication. If the level of miscommunication is too high, trust breaks down. But when there's a little bit of miscommunication, it pays to be more forgiving, right? And we also learned that if there was ever a case where there's zero miscommunication, which doesn't really exist in the real world, but that pure justice would be fine then, right? That tit for tat would be okay. But you need forgiveness because there's fallibility in the system. People make mistakes. And we've kind of just demonstrated that mathematically, I think.
Of course, real world trust is affected by much more than this. There's reputation, shared values, contracts, cultural markers, blah, blah, blah. But let's not forget the biggest lesson. What is the biggest lesson? Okay. If there's one big takeaway from all of game theory, it is this. What the game is defines what the players do. Our problem today isn't just that people are losing trust, it's that our environment acts against the evolution of trust. That may seem cynical or naive, that we're merely products of our environment, but as game theory reminds us, we are each other's environment. In the short run, the game defines the players, but in the long run, it's us players who define the game. So do what you can do to create the conditions necessary to evolve trust, build relationships, find win-wins, communicate clearly. Maybe then we can stop firing at each other, get out of our own trenches, cross no man's line, and come together. What do you think?
Yeah, it's fun to see these mathematical representations of something you can then adopt to the real world and go, oh yeah, there's a real benefit here. So I agree very much with this direction. And I like what it says here. You know, in the short run, the game defines the players. The rules of the game are actually defining what's going on. But in the long run, the players who are actually engaged in the game will shape or define the game that is being played, because they all, like if they're all copy kittens or all copycats or whatever, it will change the environment. The environment will change the way the game is actually being played by the other players. More will cooperate, and you can see that ratchet up or you can see that ratchet down over time.
Yeah, and on top of that, the things that we found affected how the outcome of the games were things that depend on human agency and human moral philosophy evolving. And so things like finding win-win scenarios, that is something that is up to each of us within our lives, within the context of our society, to look for and take advantage of win-win situations, and building the relationships and setting up those foundational variables that optimize our outcome are things that we actually do have control of. We're not simply poured into a situation and have no control of what the shape of that situation is. We affect the environment by our actions, and so that's, you know, it's like a mathematical term that we've seen expressed before through religious traditions. So when you hear David Bednar talk about, you know, you are not an object to be acted upon, you are an agent to act in the world. That's just a religious leader drawing upon their religious tradition to convey a principle that is a reflection of a little bit of what we just learned in this. All right. We can all learn to live and let lived. This is a picture from the Christmas truce between opposing trenches, published in the Illustrated London News, 1915. All right, and now we've got our. I didn't have the screen
there. Yeah, and you put that on the screen there, so everybody can see how awesome it is.
Okay, I gotta get that. I gotta get back there. Come on, there we are.
There's a
picture from the actual Christmas truce. You can see a little Christmas tree there, and you know, it's interesting because they started with this story to explain this sort of game theory thing. But you could imagine that in addition to these principles of trust and mistrust and forgiveness and established relationships, each of these people had some of these principles instilled into their hearts and into their programming through the Christian tradition that is reflected a little bit in some of the signs of that, whether it's the Christmas tree or whatever. So that was part of what informed them to come to this situation and have this type of outcome. And you know, that's not to say that no other religious or cultural tradition could have a similar outcome, as we've tried to demonstrate in this, but it just happened to be the one that was there at this time. And next is our credits. All right, so
yeah,
I actually journey.
Let's see if I can find. I had a quote that I thought was good from Daniel Dennett after reading this about the value of God, just in the building of trust. So I was trying to find that one because.
While you're looking for that, I'm going to scroll through our comments and see if there's anything specifically. You know, I'm always fascinated by pushback against this type of analysis, because I think there's something to be learned from there. Let's see. All the cheaters are broke. It's communism. They're all at the bread lines.
Yeah. So this is Dan Dennett, an atheist, talking about the value of God in the building of trust. So here he says, page 283, the God who is watching you need not be seen to be either list-making Santa or Orwell's Big Brother, but instead as a hero or a role model, as we say today, someone to emulate rather than fear. If God is just and merciful and forgiving and loving and the most wonderful being imaginable, then anyone who loves God should want to be just and merciful and forgiving and loving for goodness sake. Blurring these two very different views of God's motivating role into one is yet another causality of the gauze curtains of soft focus veneration through which we traditionally inspect religion. So he actually like turns it around at the end, but he's basically saying that the notion of God as the ultimate representation of this idealized forgiveness actually helps to build trust within the people who accept that as a hero. I want to be more like God. I want to be more like Jesus, right? Be forgiving. If you accept that as your hero, that becomes the drive that helps to motivate you in your own life, as opposed to God being some sort of bully who's trying to force you to do something. So it's more of that emulation. And Dennett picks it up, right? He's picking up that sometimes God is a position to be emulated or values to be emulated, not necessarily the bully in the sky who's forcing things. And I think that's really an interesting insight from an atheist who doesn't believe in God.
Yeah. Well, I think that's part of why I included in the acronym of Foundation of Action Ideals, Traditions, and Heritage, ideals, because what you hold up as an ideal, something to either emulate or something to pursue, whether it's in life choices, the way that you engage with other people, or particular types of outcomes, whatever your ideal is will shape kind of the programming that you approach a particular situation with. And if you look at the different philosophies that are out there and just say, well, what are your ideals? You may find them in a utopian vision of what society will look like once it's been transformed by a particular belief or philosophy, or you may find it in what the group believes an individual who has worked on themselves and transformed their own personal characteristics into as the ideal. And so there's different ways that these ideals can be given life or be given shape and form for how they affect an individual and how they exist in a culture or tradition. But I think it's always interesting to look at what those ideals are. We've got some pushback here that I think is worth mentioning. So Catherine Class says, the copycat isn't, quote, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, like the Bible says. In this case, winning was do unto others as they have done unto you. The golden rule isn't a copycat strategy. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and that is the plan, that first you see what they do, but that's what's important, I think, with the copycat is it always starts from a position of cooperate. Right out of the gate, it wants to cooperate. So do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You start from a position of, I'm going to cooperate with you out of the gate. There's my do unto others at ground zero. Yeah.
No, I agree. And I think even when you see people like Jonathan Haidt go and explore different, what he calls, ancient cultural traditions or religious traditions, and find things that are similar, moral principles that are similar, each time they're going to show up with small variations or differences that make them unique, and they're not exact copies stated in the exact words, but they may be closer to a side of this question of selfishness versus cooperation than another starting philosophical point. And I think just kind of the way that I've started to understand and view a lot of these things is kind of like signal. We're either increasing the signal of one particular direction or decreasing the signal, and you can have signals that blend or not and are not in one particular way or the other. But that's kind of just one way that I've used to conceptualize it, because it kind of takes you away from looking at things as all or nothing, black and white, existing and seeing that there can be variations in a lot of these things, but there also can be trends and things that are closer to one another than others. And so that's the approach that I'm looking at when we look at this type of analysis. Okay, let's see here. Let's see here. We've got a couple of other comments. You can scroll through if you look on the comments tab on the side. If there's anything that catches your eye that you would love to showcase, then just let me know. And while you're looking at that, I am going to bring up the next section that I think is worth looking at. Let's see here.
Okay. Yeah, I think one of the things that we're doing here is, even though we're exploring all of this in this game theory kind of abstracted way of looking at things, when we get down to the real world where the rubber hits the road, that's where I think it becomes really valuable in looking at what is going on specifically in any given paradigm or religion. You can go through and look at things more direct, but from a point of abstraction, this game theory stuff I think is really good for getting conceptually why would anybody ever be nice to anybody else, or how could that even evolve, get baked into us? Because part of my contention is that we are gentle apes, right? We evolved to cooperate, and that was kind of the secret sauce in humanity, I believe, that helped us to become the dominant species on the planet, is our ability to work, interact, relate to one another. Our language makes communication and coordination so much more important, and that's what makes us great. Is not because we have great claws or fangs like other animals. It's because we cooperate. We've developed or evolved these abilities to cooperate with one another, and that's humanity's competitive advantage.
Yeah. There's another dimension to this that I think is important when we start talking about religious traditions in particular, or even like long history of humanity back in times of tribalism and all these other things. And you'll hear tribalism invoked frequently as something that at one point gave an evolutionary advantage, but now can sometimes work against our society as we've become this worldwide species where we have different communities that engage with each other. And tribalism can sometimes trigger some of that zero-sum game thinking in how we approach our interactions. But there's a different channel that also uses game theory to kind of explore some moral questions and understanding about human sociality or sociology that I wanted to bring in. And it's particularly about something called green beard altruism. And that's just such a compelling question. I wanted to explore that with you as well. So we're going to bring that up now. I will put the link in the descriptors so people can explore this on their own. But let's just kind of go through this, and then I'll let you pause it if there's a point that you want to make. Let's see what we got here. I want to make sure that my volume is good enough. Boop. And let's go through this.
Thanks really for supporting this video. Evolution is all.
That's way too fast. All right. That's how I get through. That's how I imagine most of our audience
I
gets
think everybody watches things at 2 speed, don't they? Or,
yeah. So they were hearing that at 4 speed for a second. Okay, here we go.
About the survival.
All right, here we go.
Thanks to Brilliant for supporting this video.
I'm going to turn off the closed
If evolution is all about the survival and reproduction of the fittest individuals, then why are creatures sometimes nice to each other? In this video, we're going to build a simulation to start looking at the biology of altruism. Certain genes will code for certain types of behavior rules, and we'll see which kinds work from a gene's perspective. So what do our
Okay, that first thing I think is one of the things that you have to kind of understand is part of the vocabulary here, and that is that humans as a species have genes that can actually encode for behavior. And you've mentioned it before where, we, for whatever reason, our biology somehow translates into the outcomes of these different things. But in between these outcomes and our biology is that somehow our biology can encode for certain things. And something as simple as the desire to avoid pain, or the desire to satisfy hunger, or the desire to, receive a resource for less work if you compare it to another environment where you have to work more to receive the same resource. All these different things involve a human preference, and that preference is somehow tied to our biology. And you could even, just for demonstration's sake, look at some Animal Planet TV show where they're talking about, the Hungarian mongoose in the deserts of in the desert of Kuala Lumpur will create a unique breeding environment bed so that they can attract a mate. Well, those are behaviors that, through the complexities of evolution, have somehow been tied to some genetic way to convey it. And so when we talk about religion and culture somehow having an evolutionary component, it's kind of a layer of abstraction beyond those genetically encoded behaviors. And it's more having to do with, once you have the encoded behavior of an individual who can have a preference and have a hierarchy of values, and then you put that in an environment with other individuals, and there are things that are natural conclusions that occur from the way that can operate. And that's kind of where I think religion and culture, it's a type of evolution that sits on the back of this more ground level evolution. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about in evolutionary biology is called an extended phenotype, which is basically you've got a genotype, which is in your genes, but then those genes translate into something else, which is the phenotype. Often the phenotype is your body shape. The extended phenotype would be anything that goes beyond your body. So for a spider, encoded in its genes is the knowledge of how to make a web, right? That is actually baked into it. Same thing for like a nest for a bird. So for humans, our propensity towards language appears to be an instinct. Our propensity towards morality also appears to be something of an instinct, that children are born with a natural inclination to cooperate most of the time, right? It's baked right into us from very young to try and relate with other humans, of course. And so
that's because all the naughty children died off.
Yeah. But those are phenotypic effects, right? Anything that's a behavioral that goes beyond the body can still be encoded for in the genes, because behavior comes from your brain. And so certain inclinations towards certain types of behavior can be selected for if it's expressed phenotypically, that is, out in the world, and not just stays in the genes.
Right. And this opens the door to the dark side of some of this type of thinking, which goes a lot further to say, well, if that's true, then we can now look at certain behaviors that seem to exist in certain cultures and groups, and then we could say that's actually bad for humanity. And so then we can now start to shape humanity by limiting the reproductive capacity of those particular groups. And that crossing the threshold into that form of eugenics, I think, is one of the dark chapters of human history that it's worth learning from. And exploring these things and going down this type of analysis opens the door to that type of thinking. But I guess this came up in some of the responses to our last discussion as well. Where do you draw the line with eugenics when you start looking at this type of analysis? But that may be a subject for a future discussion. I don't know if there's anything you want to chime in on that.
Yeah, I think that there may be a misunderstanding, although I think that you're right, that what happens is people get in their minds some sort of utopian vision of where they're trying to drag the thing, and it becomes a religious impulse to eliminate everybody who doesn't fit in with the utopian vision. And that's a real problem, just for us as humans, as a political society, that whenever somebody starts to get utopian, and religion often will do this, right? We have it all figured out. We just need to get everybody on board. All of you will be copy kittens and nothing else, or we kill you, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
All right. Well, let's keep going here. Let's see here.
Sims look like. Each day, blobs will.
I'm going to rewrite it just a little bit.
So what do our Sims look like?
There's a little bit
Each day, blobs will go out to the forest to eat
fruit.
fruit.
Okay, no, that's good. If you're hearing an echo, then everyone else is. So what I'm going to do is okay, that's my microphone. And I believe what I'm do is take this down and tell me if that echo is solved.
Each tree has enough fruit to feed 2 blobs, but some of the trees have predators in them.
All right, did you hear an echo there?
No, it's better now.
Okay, good. So each of the trees has 2 blobs of fruit, and some of the trees have predators. It's a dangerous environment.
If the blobs are unlucky enough to visit a tree with a predator, they'll get eaten. But if they don't get eaten, they'll head to one of the homes and reproduce, creating 1 or 2 new blobs in their place. And then the cycle repeats. There's no altruism yet, but let's make this a bit bigger and let it run for a while to see how it goes.
So what is that grid showing us over there in the corner?
All right,
blue square. What is that thing?
Yeah. That says the number of creatures.
Okay.
And then the number of days. So it's talking about population growth.
Okay.
So if the blobs go out and get 2 fruits, then they have enough energy to come back in and reproduce. And so then they'll have more for the next generation.
All right, so this little ecosystem is mostly stable. Now let's add the ability to be altruistic. When the blobs go to a tree with a predator in it, one of them will notice the predator and it'll have 2 options for how to react. The first option is to just run away, leaving the other blob to die. We'll call this the cowardly behavior. The second option will be to make a bunch of noise and warn the other blob, but in the process attract the predator's attention with a 50% chance of getting eaten afterward. Since these blobs are risking themselves to help others, we'll call this the altruistic behavior. The blob's behavior will be controlled by a gene, which has 2 versions or alleles. The cowardly allele will be yellow, and the altruism allele will be blue. Before we get to the simulation, it's worth saying that in real life, behavior is determined by a mind-numbingly complex interaction between many genes and a creature's environment over time, but this simple model is good enough to help us grasp some fundamental ideas.
Okay, so this is a key part of this whole analysis. They used the depiction of genetic material to encode for these behaviors. And what I'm hoping that people can get out of this type of conversation is that if you consider a particular cultural or religious tradition to be the genetic material here, that then gets internalized and guides an individual's behavior in their life, then I think that's the vector by which some of these alleles get transmitted from one generation to the next. Does that make sense?
Yeah, they're using this, or you're proposing that even though they're talking about it from a genetic standpoint, we can see it from a value-based standpoint of what might apply to a religious or really any organization, right?
Yeah, exactly. It could be even like the military itself has a set of traditions and norms about how people behave and interact with each other. You could be in a corporate environment where they have a set of expectations and values that you internalize that guide the way that you act. And the thing is, you can have nested and multi-layered or independent environments that you operate in that each have their own set of values and ideals and actions. It's just that religion is something that has somehow been tied to humanity for so long and, extends into, the discourse that we're having today about what are the things that may be contributing to or detracting from how our society's cohesiveness and stability has been operating. And some people say that some of that has to do with the degree to which certain values or principles have been either elevated or diminished in the signals that exist in our cultural understanding today, in our social understanding that previously were conveyed through the religion. Okay, so let's keep going.
That in real life, behavior is determined by a mind-numbingly complex interaction between many genes and a creature's environment over time, but this simple model is good enough to help us grasp some fundamental ideas. Okay, let's start with equal numbers of each allele and see what happens.
I see. So there, that's our populations after of the respective behavioral patterns, right? So
right, exactly.
50-50,
so each day they're going out, they're acting either with cowardice or altruism, and we're seeing how the population changes.
Well, it looks like the cowards are are dominating this particular little village.
Yeah. That seems
No
really
value
similar
in.
to how we saw the cheaters before.
Yep, exactly. It's very similar. That same sort of, I'm in it just for myself. Screw
This
everybody
graph
else.
shows the frequency
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
of each allele over time. At the beginning, half the alleles are the blue altruism kind, and stacked on top, half the alleles are the yellow cowardly kind. These values change over time, but they always add up to 1 or 100%. And speaking of the change, it looks like the altruism allele goes extinct after just a few generations. Maybe we made it a little bit too dangerous to be altruistic, so let's lower the death chance for being altruistic from 50% to 10% to see if the altruism allele can do well on easy mode.
Look at that. Looks like it's still good to be a coward. Oh, there's little bumps there.
There it goes.
Okay, it took a bit longer, but the altruism allele still went extinct. Now you might think, well, hey, wait a minute. We only tried this once. Maybe it'll do better some of the time? And yeah, that's a great point. So now let's repeat 30 versions of the same situation and see how that looks. Predict ahead of time what you think will happen. Do you think...
All right, what do you think? I think we learned from the other one that
it's all going to go.
Cowards.
Yeah. They're going to win
the altruism allele will always go extinct? Or maybe the first run was a fluke and the altruism allele will actually increase in frequency more often than not. Our brains like to pretend we knew things all along, so it's good learning and science practice to make a prediction before you see a result. So, what do you think?
Cheetahs.
Okay, there's a lot going on in this graph. Each thin black line is one run, and the thick black line is the average. In some runs, the altruism allele lasted longer than others, but extinction seemed inevitable. Well, one did hang on for all 400 generations, but based on the other runs, it seems like it's pretty doomed in the long run. Yeah. So why did this version of altruism fail? Well, this is a computer simulation, so we have a perfect record for everything that happened. There were 225,817 blobs saved by warning calls. 85,781 had the altruism allele, and the other 140,036 had the cowardly allele. And 24,151 of the altruistic blobs died after giving the warning. So overall, the altruistic allele saved a net total of 61,630 copies of the altruism allele, which is good. But since the total population size is limited by the predators, the total number saved isn't really what matters. More blobs being saved just results in more blobs getting eaten later on. What does matter, though, is the competition between alleles. A successful allele for altruism would need to find a way to help itself more than it helps its competitor. So how could we do that? Well, one way could be to let the altruism alleles see each other so they know who to help. But because DNA stays inside the blobs and doesn't have eyes, we need some detectable feature to go with the altruism. The classic example of this is a green beard. And that's a fun thing to put on the blob, so let's stick with that. So instead of the allele for altruism from before, we have an allele for green beard altruism. Now, when a blob with a green beard notices a predator, it'll only warn the other blob if that blob also has a green beard. So let's see whether this green beard strategy works in a simulation. And let's go back to the 50% chance of getting eaten after giving a warning. What do you think?
All right, so restate this for us. Like, what does the green beard actually represent here?
Well, it looks like the green beard is now representing a certain... I'm only going to warn other green beards, right? There's a little bit of a tribal thing going on here where I'm going to be altruistic, but only for others of my own type. Yeah.
Right. It's like an in-group signal. And that is one of the things, whether it's a uniform, a costume, people have talked about how certain, for example, social justice warriors always have certain signifiers about that reflect what their values are. It's the blue hair or the nose piercing or things like that. Or in Mormons, it was that Mormon look or whatever. It's like clean cut, no beard. Like these are all identifiers that in the past you could say it's just cult group, mind think or whatever, like anything like that. But if you understand how those identifiers help you understand and predict behaviors and values that other people have, then that will affect how you engage with them. And that will tend to go along towards self-preserving sort of impulses that are part of our species. And so there's a logical rationality to that, even if it does dip into and rely on some of that tribalism that people have kind of demonized a little bit. There was a reason for it. And it still may serve a certain purpose, because understanding the values and the predictive nature of knowing those values in trying to understand how people may behave still is a valuable thing when you engage in social environments today.
Yeah, there's a
All
there's
right,
a little bit of a sports team analogy here, where you
yeah,
recognize, even if you've never met somebody before, you see them wearing the same jersey as a team you like, you immediately have a little bit of a connection there, a little bit of trust
yeah,
that appears. You've signaled to somebody else, we're same tribe on this one issue, instant friends,
right,
right? It's
right, exactly. And it's worth noting that even though they're talking about the same gene, but now it also encodes for the green beard, that gene is also encoding for a preference for the green beard. And it's now it is in essence a different gene. It's a gene with a mutation from the one that does not have that preference from it. And so when we talk about the evolution of religions and the way that religions have changed over time, and in our first episode, we talked about the fact that a church may change and adapt to a new environment, meaning like a new cultural environment, a new understanding, new technologies, should not be seen necessarily as a bug or proof that the religion is false, as much as it's just an understanding that this religion has within its constitution, its makeup, the ability to adapt to new environments, and that is how a successful religion can transmit itself into future environments. And so let's keep going here. All right, that was one day. Let's speed it up.
Look at that. The greenbeards are helping other greenbeards.
Yeah.
Okay, that actually worked pretty well. The greenbeard allele drove the cowardly allele to extinction, and decisively so. But again, we should test it with many runs and with different settings. I ended up testing the 50% and a 90% chance of getting eaten for 30 runs each. In each case, what do you think will happen?
What do you think? That's pretty significant. If you warning other people risk dying 9 times out of 10.
That's pretty high death rate. You got to be,
Yeah, that is a strong disincentive to warn people.
Yep. There's a dragon there, and then you're going to get eaten 9 times out of 10. Yep.
All right, at the 50% death chance, it seems like our first run wasn't a fluke. The greenbeard allele does indeed have a massive advantage. One of the runs got a pretty rough start, but it still ended up taking over before too long. At 90%, things are pretty noisy. Only 10% of the acts of altruism actually end up saving an extra blob. So the random fluctuations are pretty dominant. And even though the average shows an upward trend, the greenbeard allele does go extinct in several runs. After seeing these, I was curious to try again, but starting with only a 10% frequency for the greenbeard allele. Once again, what do you predict? Will the graphs look the same, just shifted down to start at 10%, or will something else look different?
Okay, starting
Is he
frequency.
starting at a small population? 10% starting frequency. Okay.
Yeah, I think he's changing rather than 50-50. He's, in one sense, there are going to be only 10% altruists at the beginning rather than 50%. And the other one, there's only going to be 10% of the cowards at the beginning. I'm not sure which is one, but let's see.
In the 50% case, there are a few interesting things going on. After a while, we see that the average goes completely flat because in every simulation, one allele or the other has gone extinct. Of the 30 runs, 11 had the greenbeard allele take over completely, and the other 19 had it go extinct. Even though the greenbeard allele had an advantage and saw its frequency rise on average, it's still subject to the whims of luck when there are only a few copies, and once extinction happens, it's permanent. It's interesting to imagine what kinds of alleles might have appeared in the history of the Earth and could have done well, but just got unlucky. The second interesting thing is that it seems like the greenbeard allele's advantage depends on how many greenbeards there are. Each run starts out with mostly random wobbling, but when the density of greenbeards gets higher, the helping happens more often and they get more benefit. And in the 90% death chance case, things are just really chaotic, but we still do see an upward trend on average. All right.
Okay, so I was mistaken. In this case, he's just running the same simulation again, but he's starting with a fewer number of greenbeards at the beginning, and showing that matters. Like how many people willing to cooperate at the beginning scenario does have an effect on whether or not that signal of cooperation makes it and achieves some sort of evolutionary steady state.
Right, so we have a simple version of greenbeard altruism working, but we should check to see how it does when things are just a bit more complex. Remember when I said earlier that in real life, behaviors are controlled by a complex interaction of many genes and the environment over time? Well, we're not going to be able to capture all of that complexity here, but we can at least notice that this one green beard allele is doing kind of a lot. It doesn't just code for the altruism toward green beards, which is complicated on its own, it also codes for the green beard itself. So as a small step toward a more realistic scenario, let's split those parts into two independent genes, each with two alleles. The first gene's alleles code for a green beard or no green beard, and the other gene's alleles code for altruism toward green beards or no altruism. And this means there will be four types of creatures. The blobs with no beard and no altruism will again be yellow and be called cowards. The blobs with no beard but altruism toward green beards will be blue, and they'll be called suckers. The blobs with a green beard but no altruism toward green beards will be red and called imposters. And finally, the blobs with green beards who are also altruistic toward green beards will be green and be called true beards. And it's worth clarifying that even though these blobs are now different colors for tracking purposes, the blobs themselves can't see the colors. They just see the beards. All right, to set up the next sim, we'll start with equal numbers of all these types, and we'll go back to the 50% death chance. Also, this time, let's just skip ahead and run it 30 times and look at the averages. But before we do, try making one last prediction.
Okay, do you want to chance a prediction?
Yeah,
everything's so complicated now.
Yeah, it's getting pretty complex. I guess kind of to frame it up, what I think he's trying to show here is that the alleles have to kind of identify the other alleles somehow in order for it to be efficacious. So you have to have some sort of signal to know. That's what he's getting at here, is that some are imposters presenting themselves as deceivers. Well, there are others who will actually call out for you. So this is a really good sort of way of looking at the more complex way in which we interact. Some people may be representing themselves a certain way, but then behaving in a different way, and you can't tell until you see the behavior what they're really going to do. That's what I think he's trying to simulate here. I also wanted to say that little payout table he did, that little 4x4 grid, you see that all the time in game theory. That shows up constantly. And so, it's just good to be aware of that. If you're going to play with game theory stuff at all, get used to that 4x4 grid. Yeah. This plus this plus this plus this. Here's all the interactions. And then also, I think, like when I told my wife that we were talking game theory, there have been like 20 Nobel Prizes in economics based on game theory now. That this has really got a lot of use. So that they use it all the time. These very complex versions and simulations, but mostly for economics. So anyway, I just think that's an interesting point. You got like Nobel Prize winners all the time from this stuff.
All right, well, let's go. Let's see how it plays out.
Okay, in this case, showing all the lines from every run just gives us this Jackson Pollock painting. So let's get rid of those lines and just look at the averages. So what happened? Well, the altruism allele gets eliminated pretty quickly, whether it's paired with a green beard or not. The first to go are the suckers. They help, but they never get help. It's a tough world out there. The true beards do all right at the very beginning, just like before, but they end up going extinct in the end, because they end up sacrificing themselves for the imposters. And the more imposters there are, the more a true beard is in danger of sacrificing itself. And then there are the cowards that just kind of mind their own business. They don't do great, but once the altruism allele is gone, there's really no difference between the imposter and the coward. So their relative frequencies just bounce around randomly for the rest of the run. So it seems like greenbeard altruism breaks down with even a tiny bit of complexity. And as we'd expect from this, we've only found a few examples in nature. They aren't literal greenbeards, of course, but I've added some links to some papers in the description in case you want to learn more about them. All right, those are all the systems we're going to look at in this video. To be honest, I actually find what we've seen so far to be a bit discouraging for making sense of altruism, especially in humans. We only found one type that worked at all, and it turned out to be really fragile in theory and rare in reality. But don't despair, we have a few more models to explore that are a bit more encouraging. And in the next video, we'll talk about kin selection, which follows Hamilton's rule.
All right.
So
So when you came across that channel, go ahead.
I was just going to say I took a little different conclusion than the producer of that show, because in most cases the trend line was generally up, even at the 90% death rate, right? That the average was still gently up, and that to me suggests that, well, if you run even more generations, millions and millions of them, that little tiny edge might be enough for those alleles to continue to spread, as long as there's any kind of like differentiation of reproductive success over time, you'll start to see that grow. So I didn't take away that, well, it doesn't look that promising to me. I was like, actually, I think there's enough there to suggest that there is some benefit in some cases over the long term. So
yeah, and I think the difference also when you're talking about the genetic reproduction of an allele versus the spread of an idea, you know,
right,
the meme concept, where ideas themselves, and when I say idea, I mean all of these things that we're talking about in terms of what a religion or a culture or tradition can convey, you know, norms of behavior and the way that humans interact with each other and deal with hardship and deal with interpersonal communications and things like cooperation. Like all of those are ideas. They can spread quasi-genetically by being passed from one generation to another in the context of a family that brings up a child in the same tradition, but they can also spread through interperson communication. And whether that's through proselytizing or people encountering another system of a belief, another framework of living, and deciding that that offers more advantage for them in the particular environment that they're in, and then adopting and internalizing that. And so you could take that model and there, you know, you see the cowards gradually diminishing, but that takes out the human element of if you're a coward and you're seeing that behavior is not serving you well, and that the other people are being served well by a different mode of existence, then you have the capacity as a human agent to adopt and internalize and transform who you are into that other way of being. And that works the other way too. So if you are in a religious tradition that has the benefits of a number of different norms and belief systems of this framework that has evolved over generations, that has conveyed some type of advantage, the proof of which is in its presence in the modern day over multiple generations, then if you look at it only as a collection of factual-based claims and discard it, and in discarding it, also discard all of the values, principles, and norms that went along with it, and decide to start fresh, new, discovering your own morals and principles and norms so that you explore all the other modes of being, then you're discarding established evolutionary advantage and starting from scratch with a new way of being. You may find some advantages in some domains of life, but the religion that you discarded had integrated a whole bunch of different domains in order to convey what it had. And so you may find some areas of your life you're benefiting in, other areas of your life you no longer have the advantage that went along with all of the bundled values that came together as a complete package of what was discarded in the religion. And so that's part of the complexity, I think, of the question of where will you go? When you consider that question, it may involve a lot more different things than you anticipate. And so that's kind of part of what I take away from that. So if you have anything else to share.
Yeah, maybe I wanted to dovetail a bit with what we were saying right there, that I think that when we look at humanity, we see instincts for morality that are baked into us probably by evolution, that inclination towards cooperation, working together, but then running on top of kind of that substrate, that hardware, if you will, the hardware, biological hardware, is our operating system, which is the culture in which we live. And so religion will then draw out and emphasize different types of your emotional built-in instincts. So it'll emphasize, well, you need to be more kind, or you need to be more forgiving, which is probably baked into you anyway. You already have those inclinations. Or it'll say, maybe you need to be more justice oriented. You need to, you need to go and make sure that the people who have wronged you in the past get wronged in turn. So this lays on top of these emotions that have been baked into us by millions of years, but the religion is now the operating system that we lay on top of that to draw out certain emotions that are already there. And then the ones that work best within our environments, or within the environment of that religion, will cause that propagation of that religion, right? Because it will allow more of those people to share their ideas and spread. Whereas if it doesn't match with his environment, that religion might collapse in on itself. Its operating system won't be able to survive against the other operating systems of all the other religions that are also competing. So I think there's kind of that two-layer thing. There's the biological substrate, and then this kind of operating system that's the culture. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking religion, is how the culture is influencing the biology that's already there.
Okay, well, if you've been watching this and you want to call in and rip us a new one for how we've totally, misconstrued everything, then feel free to dial 210-422-2222 and give us a bit of your mind. In the meantime, when we talk about, I've wondered often, because you'll study history and you hear about like the degraded hedonistic society of late stage Roman Empire, and people have written about the fall of the Roman Empire and how they were moral degenerates, and then like somehow hundreds of years later you have like this puritanical Victorian era where they're like putting little skirts on the legs of tables because it arises, otherwise it inflames the passions. And you're like, how in the world does human society go from this, any no holds barred environment to, at what point were people like, well, maybe all of this hedonism and the daily orgies aren't actually working out, and maybe we need to go and shift to this puritanical mode of existence. And you always wonder, like, how does that happen? How do you get from one to the other? And really, for me, a lot of it was understanding that the bundle of values that go along with those different lifestyles or those different things carry certain consequences in terms of how much of that actually is directed towards or will contribute to intergenerational propagation. And so if you have internalized the values of something which works against intergenerational stability and propagation, then that set of values will be kind of like those curves that go into extinction. They won't last into multiple generations into the future. So in that last model where you have the blobs, they go out, they engage, and then they come back home to their houses and they propagate. Well, some of those houses in that propagation thing may involve family structures that are less conducive to stability and intergenerational replication of the value structure. And so those, that's expanding the variables that you're actually examining, but that's going to tend to diminish those signals. Whereas other ones that, are more cohesive for that intergenerational propagation will tend to be something that lasts into subsequent generations. And so is there something to that component of, hyper modesty, puritanicalness, which keeps a culture integrated and stable and somehow facilitates it passing into the generation that has greater intergenerational replicability than blatant hedonism with free love everywhere? Well, there's, the blatant hedonism, free love everywhere doesn't really have as part of its encoding the dimension of child rearing and stable child environment and cultural replication in that regard. And so that becomes part of the problem there. And on this question of like how different morals may evolve, there's a great video that I wanted to showcase, but I have to go step off for just a second and I'll be right back. I will start the video.
All right. And I guess I'll hang out here and tell you guys cool stories about stuff. I saw that Snow over here in the comments made the comment, we didn't descend from the mighty caveman that stood up to the dinosaur, but the skinny, quick little ham and egger that made it back to the cave. Yeah, and I think that there's some truth to that. Yeah, that in the sweep of evolution, that it's believed that when the dinosaurs were on the planet, that the little mammals that we later descended from were not at all out in the forefront. They were the little rats that were hiding in the corners and that sort of thing. And so at different times, at different stages in the environment, different strategies are going to work and survive, and other strategies are going to be poor and fail, which I think has been kind of the whole point of today's discussion. Some things work, some things don't, but it depends a lot on the environment and what the other people in that environment are also doing. So I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm going to do this just because we've got a little bit of time here. See if this works.
Okay, I'm so sorry about that.
You're
I
back. Okay.
getting a call that I had to take, and I apologize for that. Okay, so it looks like we have a call. Let's see. Hello, are you there? Okay, for some reason I cannot hear. I'm fixing my audio issues.
Heard a little bit.
Okay, caller, are you there?
Yes. Can you guys hear me? This is Steve. Yeah, we've talked before. It's been a while, but I saw Troy there sitting there by himself, and I was kind of reminded of it. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Steve.
I saw Troy sitting there by himself, and I was reminded of a testimony meeting, you know, where there's the pause and nobody gets up to say anything.
Right.
So I thought I would call in.
I'll call in. Thank you for bearing your testimony, so we don't have to sit here and wait for somebody to come up to the podium.
Yeah, no, that was very rude of me to have to do that. And normally I wouldn't take a call in there, but it was my daughter, and I had to make sure that I diffused the situation. Okay, well,
I was just thinking.
Go ahead, Steve.
Some of the limitations that we have as humans, one of them is the amount of time we have. We're limited by, we only have so many years to figure stuff out. And so if you decide that there's an institution that's so flawed that you're not going to trust it completely, then you're just on your own. Like say you're talking about the CDC or a church or whatever, and that you recognize they've done things they shouldn't have done, or they've made a lot of errors. It doesn't really make sense to me to completely throw it all out, which I think is just what you're trying to say, because I'm not smart enough and I just don't have the time or the resources to figure stuff out. But I can kind of select the things that make the most sense about these things and sort of try to hold on to some of that stuff. If we just trash all of these things completely, it's trouble. And I don't know, is that kind of what you're trying to get at, or?
Yeah, I think for me, there's a couple of dimensions to it. One of them is your own personal life. What values do you want to hold on to that, you know, in a world where you can choose to live any way, and you happen to have inherited a set of values and norms from a religious culture that you no longer believe is fact-based, well, if you can understand that it may have achieved some of its benefits through this evolutionary paradigm, then you can have a good reason to continue to inhabit and convey those values and principles, even if you no longer take the entire truth claims of the religion itself. That's one side. The other side of it is that maybe it allows you to view with a little bit more forgiveness and compassion the people who remain in the faith itself. There's a tendency that sometimes exists in the ex-Mormon atheist community to see all of these religious people as a bunch of nut jobs who, blindly follow their faith, and they're a bunch of idiot schlubs. And I think if you understand some of these types of forces and benefits that are part of the religious project, it's more than simply just a collection of fact-based claims about the universe, then you can perhaps view the people who continue to find those elements of their life precious to them, you can see them with a little bit more compassion.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I had another thought, but it's escaping me at the moment.
Yeah, I don't know if this to anyone will translate into, well, then off and get me back in the pews. Some people, it may at least give them room to find a way to do that, to still feel like they have some personal integrity in their beliefs, kind of framing it in a different way, so they don't have to feel like they are deceiving themselves or being untrue to themselves in going back and finding some connection with their religious or cultural heritage. But I think it's one way that may be helpful to some people.
So if you're like me, I think you are in this regard, that I grew up thinking that the church is true. It's completely true, and that the leaders, they were rarely ever going to make a mistake. And but there's really nothing out there that's really like that. There's no organization that's always going to be right, or that's always going to be that you can always completely trust. But I think you have to be able to partially trust or appreciate that we need some structure to just get through life. And so we're going to have to accept a little bit of the flaws and imperfections of whatever it is. It's not just it's not just that because there's a lot of flaws or even severe flaws. Sometimes we might have to accept pretty bad flaws in order to get the structure that we need for our society. Anyway, that's all I have to say, I guess. I'm just sort of organizing my thoughts here.
No, those are well stated. For me, it's kind of funny, if you have been involved in the world of the ex-Mormon influencer community and seen some of the voices on the Mormon side. One of them who always makes a splash wherever he is Kwaku. He's a young Black gentleman who was a convert to the Mormon church and has become very vocal in his defense of the church. And one of the criticisms that constantly gets levied against the church is that it is a racist, white supremacist church. And there's one exchange, I don't know where it's from, but somebody confronted Kwaku with this argument, and he said, listen, where am I going to go? Because if I leave this church and go anywhere else, no matter what institution I go to, it's going to have some form of racism in its history. And so none of these organizations are sinless in that regard. So I'm still choosing to put my hat in with the Mormon church itself. And his perspective on that is probably going to evolve over time. But one of the dimensions of our first conversation is that what the religion represents in the lives of the individuals today is the unique product of this evolutionary process. And you can always go back in time, look back into the past somewhere, and find some moment where it was wrong on some idea. It was out of step with some moral understanding that we have now. But it's okay to understand that that was at an earlier time in its evolution, and give it the credit for having adapted and updated its set of rules to conform to a new moral understanding of the universe, and that doesn't invalidate the project of the tradition itself. Now, you can really only do that if you're looking at these traditions as evolving living collections of, the evolving living faith paradigm that I'm talking about here, not as a concrete fact-based authority. the fact that the religion itself sees itself and wants itself to be seen as a concrete religious-based authority is a factor of the religion. It may have something to do with how people, when they're young in particular, hold on to it and incorporate it into their lives, but it has nothing to do with this type of analysis of it. It will come to heads of it if they decide, well, since we're a concrete-based faith, we're going to kick out anyone who is a metaphorical, utility-based believer. And it has yet to make that threshold its dominant feature, although it does exist in pockets. So that's what I have to say about that.
Now, I'll let you go, but just one other thing. I was, while you were talking, I was thinking, the earliest version of the Handbook of Instructions might have been the Book of Leviticus.
Yeah.
And I mean, we don't adhere to that. I mean, how many people have even, it's pretty much obsolete. So that's just proof that all this stuff does change, evolve, and dramatically, if you look at 1,000 years, it's completely different.
And even over the course of my lifetime, if I were to look at the church as it existed when I was a teenage boy, it's a very different creature from how it is today. So it is adapting even within the span of one lifetime. If we're talking about the Mormon church, other churches may be adapting at higher or lower rates of change. But as we've seen in some of these simulations, just because a change happened doesn't necessarily mean that it's good. It may be a change that ends up providing more problems in the evolutionary playing field. So it's really, when you contemplate any of these changes, you kind of have to wait a few generations to see how things are going to pan out in the end. So that conservative impulse to be very careful and deliberate, thoughtful, and slow in your change is a protective impulse that I think is worth regarding.
Well, thank you very much for letting me talk, and I'll probably talk to you again in the future at some point. Thanks again.
All right, appreciate the call, Steve. Take care.
You too.
All right.
I was gonna maybe to add on to what Steve was saying there, or at least something that I think is worth looking at, is that to me, it helps to view religion as a human endeavor, something that we've done as humans, not as a supernatural thing, which is what you tend to do when you're part of a religion. You think, well, this is the one true religion, or this has all the knowledge, or there's something really special about my religion, right? It's based around the truth claims. But if you look at it as religion is something that humans do all around the world, they have for millions of years, it's more like music, or it's more like art. Religion is in that same ballpark. Then you can evaluate a religion not necessarily for its truth claims, but more for what values it may have, what sort of things it has brought through over time. And that way you can kind of see religions in a context of the other religions. And to me, that helps me make peace with it, that I can look at it and say, oh, well, Buddhism has this group of things, and we also see that same sort of thing over here in Mormonism. The commonality there is the space in which I think that's where we can learn from. That's the religious commonality of what works versus what things may not work, without being like necessarily beholden to any one dogma or creed, right? Instead, it's more of a, let's look at the values ensconced in religion around the world and see what we can learn from those things. But at the same time, we also have to recognize that there's something about religion and that supernatural component that is a motivating factor. And if you don't have that, people lose interest and they don't stay motivated. So there's something that almost requires a grand cosmic purpose for people to want to do their religion. Otherwise, it just becomes like a social club or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and that may be the very fact of it. In a pre-scientific era, it is only with supernatural claims that tend to tie up all of the loose knots of understanding that you can give somebody the idea that they actually have to incorporate and embed all of these beliefs into their lives, or else they are, they risk damnation into the eternities,
right. Yeah.
Or some other supernatural punishment. That's a way to compel belief and adherence. And so it worked in the pre-scientific era, but beyond that, then it loses its power. So you have to find some other way to do it if the religions are going to survive. And we're seeing how they struggle with that. But we still have the holdover of that benefit in how humans see and understand the world. Okay, well, at the risk of achieving the 3-hour mark, again, like last time, we should probably wrap it up here. I've enjoyed the conversation, Troy. You bring so much of your own experience and insight into this. It's always a joy to listen to you discuss about it. In the future, there's a couple of other things that we're going to discuss. We need to have the conversation about Lisa the iconoclast in The Simpsons.
Yes,
We've talked a little bit about how there's a disconnect between what a religion or culture means in the lives of its members today versus what the founder started. And there's something to contemplate about that. And I think that'll be a fun discussion to have in the future. Beyond that, we also have the Squid Game bridge and the map of life that is a discussion that I'm trying to find a good actual video game rather than game theory, but it's a little bit related to kind of illustrate. And hopefully when we get that together, that'll be a fun discussion. There's a couple of other things that escape my mind now, but I have them all listed out in a document, so we will get to them eventually. So with that said, I have nothing else. Do you have anything else you want to share with our audience, Troy?
I really appreciate this opportunity to come on your channel and talk about these ideas. And they are kind of big ideas. They are kind of things that are difficult sometimes to wrap your head around. So I appreciate that our audience is also willing to come along with the ride for us, because I don't feel like you or I are really advocating for anything so much as just trying to improve understanding, analyze, and maybe approach more of a peaceful relation with our past religious past. You know, at least that's how I view it. And for me, it's been very helpful to contextualize religion as something that humans do, rather than is it true or is it false? You know, and getting into just the false binary. I think of things purely in terms of claims and evidences, which is still important. We still need to do that, but there's also another aspect to religion that can be overlooked that I think we need to pay attention to. So thank you for allowing me to be the atheist guy who doesn't believe any of it, but still sees value in it, you know?
Well, I appreciate it. And so with that being said, we will go ahead and close out today. And until next time, this has been Talk on Things and Stuff.